These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are Raycon Earbuds. Stay at home with better sound. More info at raycon.com/Tom. Omega XL, which according to clinical research helps joints. More info at omegaxl.com/Tom. CB Distillery, CBD for sleeping. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. The Clean Phone Pro, phone sanitizer and charger. More info at thenewdealshop.com. Keeps Hair Loss Treatment. More info at keeps.com/Tom. And Plexiderm Wrinkle Reducer. Real science, real results. More info at plexiderm.com, code TOM.
We say fight back!
It's the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from The Undercommons, Fugitive Planning and Black Study by Stefano Harney and Fred Moten. This is from the introduction. It starts with love, exchange, fellowship. It ends as it begins, in motion, in between various modes of being and belonging, and on the way to new economies of giving, taking, being with and for. And it ends with a ride in a Buick Skylark on a way to another place altogether. Surprising, perhaps, after we have engaged dispossession, debt, dislocation, and violence, but not surprising when you have understood that the projects of fugitive planning and black study are mostly about reaching out to find connection. They are about making common cause with the brokenness of being, a brokenness, I would venture to say, that is also blackness, that remains blackness, and will, despite all, remain broken, because this book is not a prescription for repair. If we do not seek to fix what has been broken, then what? How do we resolve to live with brokenness, with being broke, which is also what Moten and Harney called debt? Well, given that debt is sometimes a history of giving, at other times a history of taking, at all times a history of capitalism, and given that debt also signifies a promise of ownership but never delivers on that promise, we have to understand that debt is something that cannot be paid off. Debt, as Harney puts it, presumes a kind of individualized realization to a naturalized economy that is predicated upon exploitation. Can we have, he asks, another sense of what is owed that does not presume a nexus of activities like recognition and acknowledgement, payment and gratitude? Can debt become a principle of elaboration? Moten links economic debt to the brokenness of being in the interview with Stefan Shukatis, who he acknowledges that some debts should be paid and that much is owed, especially to black people, by white people. And yet he says, I also know that it is, that what it is that is supposed to be repaired is irreparable. It can't be repaired. The only thing we can do is tear this stuff down completely and build something new, end of quote. The Undercommons do not come to pay their debts, to repair what has been broken, to fix what has been undone. If you want to know what the Undercommons wants, what Moten and Harney want, what black people, indigenous people, queers, and poor people want, what we, the we who cohabit in the space of the Undercommons want, it is this. We cannot be satisfied with the recognition and acknowledgement generated by the very system that denies A, that anything was ever broken, and B, that we deserve to be the broken part. So we refuse to ask for recognition, and instead we want to take apart, dismantle, tear down that structure right now. That right now limits our ability to find each other, to see beyond it, and to access the places that we know live outside its walls. We cannot say what new structures will replace the ones we live with yet, because once we have torn stuff down, we will inevitably see more and see differently and feel a new sense of wanting and being and becoming. What we want after the break will be different from what we think we want before the break, and both are necessarily different from the desires that issue from being in the dark. Let's come at this by another path. In the melancholic and visionary 2009 film version of Maurice Sendak's Where the Wild Things Are, 1963, Max, the small seeker who leaves his room, his home, his family to find the world beyond, finds a world of lost and lonely beasts, and they promptly make him their king. Max is the first king the wild things have had, whom they did not eat, and who did not, in turn, try to eat them. And the beasts are the first grown things that Max has met, who want his opinion, his judgment, and his rule. Max's power is that he is small while they are big. He promises the beasts that he has no plans to eat them, and that this is more than anyone has ever promised them. He promises them that he will find ways through and around and will slip through the cracks and re-crack the cracks if they fill up. He promises to keep sadness at bay and to make the world with the wild creatures that roared their terrible roars and gnashed their terrible teeth and rolled their terrible eyes and showed their terrible claws. That Max fails to make the wild things happy or to save them or to make the world with them is less important than the fact that he found them and he recognized in them the end of something and potentially the path to an alternative in his world, or an alternative to his world, excuse me. The wild things were not the utopian creatures of fairy tales. They were the rejected and lost subjects of the world Max had left behind. And because he shuttles between the Oedipal land where his mother rules and the ruined world of the wild, he knows the parameters of the real. He sees what is included and what is left out. And he is now able to set sail for another place, a place that is neither the home he left nor the home to which he wants to return. Moten and Harney want to gesture to another place, a wild place that is not simply the leftover space that limbs real and regulated zones of polite society. Rather, it is a wild place that continuously produces its own unregulated wilderness. The zone we enter through Moten and Harney is ongoing and exists in the present, and as Harney puts it, some kind of demand is already being enacted, fulfilled in the call itself. While describing the riots of London in 2011, Harney suggests that the riots and insurrections do not separate out the request, the demand, and the call. Rather, they enact the one in the other. The book is The Undercommons, Fugitive Planning and Black Study.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And greetings, my friends, patriots, lovers of democracy, truth, and justice, believers in peace, freedom, and the American way. Thom Hartmann here with you. Typically today, in fact, this hour is where Congressman Mark Pocan drops by and hangs out with us for an hour. That will be a little later in the week, tomorrow or Friday. But we've got a really big shoe for you today. Sonia Shah is going to be talking with us in the, I believe, our third hour about the story that we tell ourselves about the coronavirus and how we contextualize it. This is a fascinating conversation. Thomas Kennedy is going to drop by. He's the guy who shouted down or interrupted Florida Governor Ron DeSantis saying you should resign. Interesting stuff going on in Florida. We'll hear about that in about 25, 30 minutes. And I wanted to get into in some depth this conversation about Donald Trump possibly starting a war with China. In fact, we're going to kick off our second hour with that. But I want to start out today with peak libertarianism. I think that we are now, it could get worse, but so far, we are at peak libertarianism here in the United States. And this bizarre experiment that has been promoted by the billionaire class for over 40 years is literally killing us. Back in the years before Ronald Reagan, there was this real estate lobbying group. It was called the FEE, F-E-E. And they came up with the idea of creating a political party to justify deregulating the real estate and finance industries so that they could make more money. party would give them ideological and political cover, and they developed an elaborate theology around all this. What came out of this political party that came out of this lobbying group, literally invented by a lobbying group, was called the Libertarian Party. And their principal argument was that if everyone acted separately and independently, in all cases with maximum selfishness, that would produce the very best outcome for society. This was advocated in various forms by Ayn Rand, by Milton Friedman, by Friedrich von Hayek, by von Mises, and others. And, try to provide a philosophical argument or framework to basically a justification for greed, selfishness, and the massive acquisition of wealth. In this libertarian world, there'd be no government needed beyond an army and a police force and a court system to defend the rights of property owners. In 1980, David Koch, the billionaire, actually ran for vice president on this newly formed Libertarian Party ticket. His platform was to privatize the post office, something that we will be talking about today. It looks like Trump is well on track to do that. Shut down all public schools, Betsy DeVos. Privatize Medicare and Medicaid, Seema Verma. End food stamps and all other forms of welfare, every Republican in Congress. Deregulate all corporate oversight. We'll get to that in just a second. And sell off the federal government's land and other assets to billionaires and big corporations. This was David Koch's political platform in 1980 when he ran for vice president. And since then, libertarian billionaires and right-wing media have been working really, really hard to get Americans to agree with Ronald Reagan's statement that he made in his first inaugural address, where he said, "In this present crisis, government is not the solution to our problem, government is the problem." Well, Trump is getting us there now. Every federal agency of any consequence is now run by a lobbyist or a former industry insider. The Labor Department, under Eugene Scalia, actively trying to destroy organized labor. The Interior Department, under an oil lobbyist, is selling off our public lands. The EPA, promoting deadly pesticides and allowing more and more pollution. The FCC is dancing to the tune of the giant telco companies and the internet service providers like Comcast. The Education Department is actively working to shut down and privatize our public school systems. The U.S. Department of Agriculture is shutting down food inspections. Even the IRS and the Social Security agencies have been gutted. Tens of thousands of their employees laid off just in the last couple of years. So now very, very wealthy people are no longer having their tax returns audited, and the wait time for Social Security disability claims are now officially well over 2 years. The guy Trump put in charge of the post office, he's actively trying to destroy the post office, slowing down mail. And the bonus for that, slowing down mail, is that the bonus for Trump on that is that it could throw a huge monkey wrench into any vote by mail efforts this November. Trump has pulled us out of the Paris Climate Accords. Fossil fuel lobbyists now control America's response to global warming. Our nation's response to the coronavirus has been turned over to private for-profit testing and drug companies. And the Trump administration refuses to implement any kind of official government policy, saying that it's all up to individual responsibility. The result is over 130,000 dead Americans and 3 million Americans who are currently infected and know it and are scared to death that they might die or they might kill other people and their families. While these libertarian ideas and policies promoted by that lobbying group back in the 1960s have made CEOs and billionaire investors very, very rich, it's literally killing the rest of us. FDR put America back together after the Republican Great Depression. He built the greatest and wealthiest middle class literally in the history of the world at that time. And now 40 years of libertarian Reaganomics have gutted our middle class, made a handful of oligarchs wealthier than anybody in the history of the world, and brought an entire generation of hustlers and grifters into public office via the GOP. When America was coasting on FDR's success in rebuilding our government and our institutions, nobody really took these crackpots seriously. Now that they've had 40 years to make their project work, we're hitting peak libertarianism. It's tearing our country apart. It's pitting Americans against each other and literally killing thousands of people every day. If this country is going to survive as a functioning democratic republic, we have to repudiate this whole greed is good theology, the ideology of libertarianism. We have to get billionaires and their money out of politics, and we have to rebuild our civil institutions. And that starts with waking Americans up to the incredible damage that 40 years of libertarian Reaganism has done to this country. I got to tell you, by the way, I'm reading a book right now by a fellow by the last name of Bergman. He's Dutch, and the book is called Humankind. And it lays out clearly and specifically how he sets out to address this question. I raised this question in my book Screwed back in 2005. I thought it was in Threshold too, but it turns out it's not. It must just be in Screwed. And in fact, I've got to go find a copy of Screwed and pull it out. But it was, back during the Enlightenment, basically there were two schools, two philosophical schools. You had on the one hand, the first guy who wrote about this, Hobbes, who said without a Leviathan, a giant beast, he referred to it as the iron fist of church or state. Without that Leviathan, without that controlling force, that human life would be terrible, that in prehistory, life was nasty, short, and brutish. And then, about 33 years after Hobbes died, along came Jean-Jacques Rousseau, the French philosopher and scientist, who said, no, it is civilization that has caused life to become nasty, brutish, and short. And back when we lived as hunter-gatherers, life was actually really, really good. And so the question, and many of the founders and framers of this country and much of the idealism on which this country was founded were big fans of Rousseau. Although a lot of the conservatives among them, including people like John Adams, are big fans of Hobbes. And so he sets out to answer this question: who was right, Hobbes or Rousseau? I'm about a third of the way through the book. I recommend it really highly, Bergman's Humankind. But, I guess our question here for this first hour, beyond anything else, is are we going to continue to let this libertarianism, this Hobbesian idea, continue to destroy our country and kill us?
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
There is math out there suggesting that as many as 9 million Americans could die from this coronavirus. Seriously. And welcome back. Hang on just a second here. I've just had to type a little magic word in here to get into, restart required. Okay, hang on just a second here. There we go. To get my call screen software up. But this whole idea of what is human nature is an absolutely fascinating idea. I mean, is the essence of human nature that we are good, that we are cooperative, that we're here for each other, or is the essence of human nature something quite different? Let me pick up some of your phone calls here. John in High Bridge, New Jersey. Hey, John, what's on your mind today? John? No John. Okay, I'm going to put John on hold. He's on line 1, Joyce. And let's see here, Don in Harrington, Delaware. Hey, Don, what's up?
Hey, Tom, I'm a letter carrier, and it got leaked out that our new Postmaster General DeJoy has ordered mail to be delayed, no overtime. It's happening in our region. Routes aren't going out. Medicine's not going out. They're not having any of our case, or the case mail's not being delivered. Today, a route might not get delivered. We had one office, 6 routes didn't get delivered, and then tomorrow they'll get delivered, then they'll pick another 6 routes. If that's happening to you, you need to call your congressmen and senators and complain about it. I mean, we're filing grievances, but that's going to take time.
Yeah. Yeah, Sean. I was talking with Sean about this yesterday. We were trying to get the head of the letter carriers union on the program to talk about this. I mean, it is. This is the extension of what I was talking about. This is your peak libertarianism. This was, David Koch ran on a platform of privatizing the post office, and he has passed on, but his brother continues to fund these right-wing groups in the Republican Party, and the Republican Party is gung-ho to do this, and this is where we're at. I mean, it's a terrible thing with the post office, and like I said earlier, I think it's the twofer here is that Trump gets to disrupt the elections this fall as well, so that he can claim that we can't certify the vote because we can't, we don't know when they came in and there's too many mail votes, and so we're just going to have to let the House of Representatives vote. And the 12th Amendment solution comes about. That I continue going back to that because I really think that this is what these guys are thinking about. But they want to privatize our fire departments. I mean, they want to privatize our roads.
Could you ask Congressman Pocan about this? Yeah,
he'll be on the program either tomorrow or Friday, and we will get into that. There's no doubt in my mind about it. And Don, you said you're a letter carrier. Is the general response of your peers defiance or depression?
We're not happy at all because, we care about our customers. I'm a union steward, and I'm calling around. I'm letting Senator Carper know what's going on in each city in my state. Right. So
you guys are going to fight back. Good.
Oh, yeah. We'll fight back through congressional and union. I'm going to be very busy with grievances every day. Great.
Don, thank you very much.
Thanks for your help, Tom.
Good talking to you. I appreciate your call. It's amazing. It's just amazing. We'll be right back. Stick with me. Our 1 hour free podcast recaps our show, and it's available wherever fine podcasts are found. And we have the full 3 hour podcast available over at thomhartmann.com if you want to really support our program. So we have a new video up for people who are supporters of the Thom Hartmann Program. Specifically, it's over at thomhartmann.com, talking about language, how we use language. Language matters tremendously. And we have chosen as a society, as a culture, as media, as political leadership, etc., not to refer to people like Steve Mnuchin, who threw thousands of people out of their homes illegally during the banking crisis, as looters, not to refer to Rex Tillerson, whose oil company has ravaged much of the third world, literally destroying people's lives, killing people, poisoning people. We don't refer to them as looters. We don't refer to the police who go into neighborhoods and kill people, minorities, particularly African Americans. We don't refer to them as looters, stealing their lives. But when black people rise up and say, no, enough, we call them looters. There's something wrong with this. Check it out. It's at thomhartmann.com. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Attempted murder of your post office. This is the outrage. A piece over at commondreams.org. Postal workers and their allies in Congress. We just had a call from a postal worker who said he's also the union steward. And they are absolutely raising hell. They are calling their senators. They're calling their members of the House. The Congress, the House of Representatives, Democrats in the House have already appropriated money to keep the post office going. But this Louis DeJoy, this new Postmaster General that Trump put into place just a few months ago, or last month, he just issued a whole series of memos. I tweeted this stuff out yesterday afternoon. If you want to see the actual, some of the actual content of some of these memos and things, you can just check out my Twitter feed. But he's issued these memos announcing, quote, major operational changes to the USPS. And the Washington Post says this, quote, could slow down mail delivery, and that they're warning agencies, employees, that the Postal Service would not survive unless it makes difficult changes to cut costs. Now, you and I both know that a large part of the so-called crisis in the post office is the result of in 2005, or perhaps it was 2006, back in the day, the post office was incredibly profitable. Now, the post office does not use government money. There's no federal money being used in the post office. The closest you can get to that is that the infrastructure of the post office, the buildings and things, are owned by the federal government. But everything else, the gas that they use, the vehicles they drive, the paraphernalia and uniforms and the stuff that the postal carriers use, the bag full of mail over their shoulder, all that stuff is paid for with your postage stamps. The cost, the operating costs, the ongoing, everything. The post office has been running independently since, I believe, since the Reagan era. And, somebody correct me on this because I'm not certain exactly when all this started, but I'm pretty sure it was in my lifetime. But in any case, the post office came out and said, we are the largest vehicle fleet in the United States. And we are showing a good profit. We're selling a lot of stamps. We're making money. And we're going to take that profit. We're going to take a few $1 billion, and we're going to buy new vehicles that are clean, that are energy efficient. They were going to put the little cars that they drive around in, the little postal vehicles that they come and deliver mail door to door with, or house to, the postal delivery, whatever they call those things that you have in neighborhoods where there's 10 mailboxes. Those were all going to be electric. And the trucks that they drive, the big trucks, they were going to be hydrogen powered. And in fact, they rolled out an electric truck and a hydrogen powered, an electric car and a hydrogen powered truck at this big press conference that they had in Washington, D.C., saying, here's what we're going to do. Isn't this cool? We're going to do our part to solve the problem of climate change. And immediately, the fossil fuel billionaires said, oh, no, you don't. What, you're going to change this country so that, suddenly we're going to stop using fossil fuels? Don't think so. Ain't going to happen. Not on my watch. And so Congress passed this law, and I believe it was in 2006 the law was passed, that said that for the next 10 years, the post office had to set aside $5 billion every single year to pay for the health benefits. So this is all assuming that there will never be Medicare for all. To pay for the health benefits of retirees 75 years from now. To pay for the health benefits of people who are going to retire 75 years from now who are not yet born. And for 10 years, based on this legislation pushed by George W. Bush, the oil executive, Dick Cheney, the oil executive, and the Republicans in Congress over the loud objections of Democrats, for 10 years, we sucked $5 billion a year out of the post office. This is classic Starve the Beast. Reagan's whole Starve the Beast strategy was cut back the funding to an agency until that agency is no longer able to do their job properly. Then you point at them and say, they can't do their job properly. We need to sell that off to some billionaire. Let's sell the post office off to FedEx. They're not even unionized. That'll be the best customer or the best purchaser possible. And that's exactly what Trump is doing right now. And Trump's guy, Louis DeJoy, Representative Congressman Bill Pascrell says, with our states now reliant on mail voting to continue elections during the pandemic, the destabilizing of the post office is a direct attack on American democracy itself. He is not exaggerating. It literally is a direct attack on democracy itself. Make no mistake. This is where we're at. The Trump administration is, Steve Bannon said they were going to do this. Remember, right after Trump was inaugurated, what's your first goal? Well, our main mission is to deconstruct the administrative state. What's the administrative state? Oh, that's the post office, the FDA, the USDA, the EPA, the IRS, basically all the agencies of the federal government. The Trump administration proclaimed that their goal was to destroy American government.
Listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
And now they are doing it right in front of us. Are you guys ready for peak libertarianism? How do you suggest that we push back on this? Today we're reading from Requiem for the American Dream, The 10 Principles of Concentration of Wealth and Power by Noam Chomsky. Brand new book. From the preface, a note on the American dream. During the Great Depression, which I'm old enough to remember, it was bad, much worse objectively than today. But there was a sense that we'll get out of this somehow, an expectation that things are going to get better. Maybe we don't have jobs today, but they'll be coming back tomorrow and we can work together for a brighter future. This was a time of a lot of political radicalism that would hopefully lead to a different future, one with more justice, equality, and freedom. Breaking down repressive class structures, and so on. There was just a general sense that this will work out somehow. Most of my family, for instance, were unemployed working class. The rise of the union movement itself was a reflection of, and a source of, optimism and hopefulness. And that's missing today. Today there's a general feeling that nothing's coming back. It's over. The American dream, like most dreams, has large elements of myth to it. Part of the 19th century dream was the Horatio Alger story. We're dirt poor, but we're going to work hard and we'll find a way out of it, which was true to an extent. Take my father, who came in 1913 from a very poor village in Eastern Europe. He was able to get a job in a sweatshop in Baltimore and gradually work himself up to the point where he could go to college, get a degree, and finally even a PhD. He ended up living what's called a middle-class lifestyle. A lot of people could do that. It was possible for immigrants from Europe in the early days to achieve a level of wealth, privilege, freedom, and independence that wouldn't have been imaginable in their countries of origin. But now we simply know that that's not true anymore. Social mobility, in fact, is lower here than it is in Europe. But the dream persists, fostered by propaganda. You hear it in every political speech. Vote for me, you'll get the dream back. They all reiterate it in similar words. You even hear it from people who are destroying the dream, whether they know it or not. But the dream has to be sustained. Otherwise, how are you going to get people in the richest, most powerful country in world history with extraordinary advantages to face the reality that they see around them? Inequality is really unprecedented. If you look at total inequality now, it's like the worst periods of American history. But if you refine it more closely, the inequality comes from the extreme wealth in a tiny sector of the population, a fraction of the 1%. There were periods like the Gilded Age in the 1890s and the Roaring '20s and so on, when a situation developed rather similar to this. But the current period is extreme. Because if you look at the wealth distribution, the inequality comes mostly from super wealthy. Literally, the top 0.1% are just super wealthy. This is the result of over 30 years of a shift in social and economic policy. If you check, you find that over the course of these years, the government policy has been modified completely against the will of the population to provide enormous benefits to the very rich. And for most of the population, the majority, real incomes have almost stagnated for over 30 years. The middle class, in that sense, that unique American sense, is under severe attack. A significant part of the American dream is class mobility. You're born poor, you work hard, you get rich. The idea that it's possible for everyone to get a decent job, buy a home, get a car before their children go to school, and have their children go to school, it's all collapsed. Take a look at American society. Imagine yourself looking down from Mars. What do you see? In the United States, there are professed values like democracy. In a democracy, public opinion is going to have some influence on policy, and then the government carries out actions determined by the population. That's what democracy means. It's important to understand that privileged and powerful sectors have never liked democracy, and for very good reasons. Democracy puts power into the hands of the general population and takes it away from the privileged and powerful. It's a principle of concentration of wealth and power. Concentration of wealth yields concentration of power, particularly so as the cost of elections skyrockets, which forces the political parties even more deeply into the pockets of major corporations. This political power quickly translates into legislation that then increases the concentration of wealth. So fiscal policy, like tax policy, deregulation, rules of corporate governance, and a whole variety of measures, political measures designed to increase the concentration of wealth and power, yields more political power to do the same thing. And that's what we've been seeing. So we have this kind of vicious cycle in progress. I mean, the wealthy always did have an inordinate amount of control over policy. Actually, that goes back centuries. It's so traditional that it was described by Adam Smith in 1776. You read the famous Wealth of Nations. He says in England, quote, the principal architects of policy are the people who own the society. In his day, in Adam Smith's day, merchants and manufacturers. And they make sure that their own interests are very well cared for, however grievous the impact on the people of England or others. Now, it's not merchants and manufacturers, it's financial institutions and multinational corporations. The people who Adam Smith called the masters of mankind, and they're following the vile maxim, all for ourselves and nothing for anyone else. They're just going to pursue policies that benefit them and harm everyone else. Well, that's a pretty general maxim of politics that's been studied closely in the United States. Those are the policies that have increasingly been followed. And in the absence of a general popular reaction, that's pretty much what you'd expect. Then we get into principle number 1, reduce democracy. And, he goes through his 10 principles. The book, Requiem for the American Dream. On the science revolution this week, can Americans stop the Republican Party and their billionaire buddies before another 100,000 Americans die from COVID-19? Dr. Michael Mann is here, and I'm asking him about the new climate models that are projecting even more extreme warming. Are they correct? Remington Gregg, the Council for Public Citizen, joins me on how the coronavirus continues to spread, yet there are no enforceable health standards coming out of this administration. Also, Chloe Waterman with Friends of the Earth drops by on how we stop meatpacking plants from killing us. Find The Science Revolution wherever fine podcasts are available. So a day or two or three ago, I was reading Twitter, and there was this extraordinary guy down in Florida who was yelling at Ron DeSantis, the governor, "You should resign." I thought, whoa, who is this? Who is that masked man? I mean, he wasn't masked. Well, actually, I guess he was masked. But in any case, he used to run he was the legislative director for the Miami-based Florida Immigrant Coalition. Then he worked for Bernie Sanders' 2016 presidential campaign in Washington, D.C. back in 2016. And now Thomas Kennedy is the Florida State Coordinator for United We Dream, unitedwedream.org. And I have been, looking for somebody from Florida who's really wired into the local politics down there to find out what the hell is going on in that state. Thomas Kennedy, welcome to the program.
Oh, thank you for having me. Super excited. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Thomas, and thanks for joining us. And tell us about. First of all, I want to find out what all about UnitedWeDream.org. But let's start with your confrontation with Ron DeSantis, the governor of your state. Tell us about that.
Yeah. So I found out about this conference, just an hour before it was going to happen, because they announced them very late because they want to avoid the public going and holding them accountable. And I decided to just go and, exercise my First Amendment right and let them know what I think, because I'm fed up with the situation here in Florida. We're worse than we have ever been. 4 months, since the start of this pandemic, or at least when it bursted into the public consciousness. We are getting record or almost record cases every day. Dozens or hundreds of people are dying. 133 people died yesterday, 112 today. Small businesses are closing. People can't access their unemployment benefits. Tests are taking 1, 2, sometimes 3 weeks or more to get back. It's just a complete and total disaster what's happening. And the governor pretends like everything is fine. He manipulates data, and he needs to be challenged and confronted and held accountable.
Yeah. First of all, was there any consequence to you of yelling at your governor there in public? Did you get arrested or anything like that, or pushed out of the way, or did somebody come up and breathe on you? I mean, what happened?
Well, yeah. I mean, like the guy came to me. I don't know if he was some sort of staffer. I don't know what his role was, but he pushed me back all the way out. And you can see in the video, he pushed me back. I think I tell him that social distance or something like that, but he pushed me back. I didn't really resist. I stepped back as he was pushing me. And then once I was outside, he threatened me with arrest. And what I told him was look, you all gave me a credential. Like, I walked in here, I asked for a credential, you all gave it to me. I have a right to be here, because he was like, this is private property, you're trespassing. And I was like, actually, I have a pass given by you guys. And I just told him I'm here as a person who's represented by this governor to tell him that I don't agree with what he's doing, and they just let me go. I just left because I didn't want to escalate the situation further.
Yeah, I get it. We're talking with Thomas Kennedy, the Florida State Coordinator for United We Dream. Tell us about UnitedWeDream.org.
Yeah, so United We Dream is an amazing organization. We are the largest immigrant youth network in the country with over 500,000 members. We do advocacy on behalf of immigrant communities and progressive causes. And yeah, here in Florida, we're doing a ton of work around issue of immigration detention centers that are completely held unaccountable in terms of anything they do. But obviously, during this public health crisis, they are, they're a petri dish to these for this virus. The guards are coming in and out, spreading the disease. They're not giving protective equipment to the staff or the people in detention. And we're also doing work around, trying to get more access to testing for immigrants who, face all kinds of obstacles in terms of getting their results or even accessing the testing in and of itself.
The Supreme Court ruled that the Trump administration has to go back to running the DACA program, as it was envisioned, as it was created. So far, they haven't done that. Are you guys working on that issue too? And if so, or even if not, what do you know about it and where it's all going? What are you all hearing?
Yeah, United We Dream was part of something called the Home is Here Coalition, which is various organizations that came together to fight back against that the unjust effort to rescind DACA by the Trump administration. And yeah, we won that case, which was huge, unexpected, frankly, and such good news for hundreds of thousands of immigrant youth who, their lives were in the balance, right? And they were living with daily anxiety every day. Obviously, we cannot trust the Trump administration to do the right thing. They frankly are rogue. They don't respect the branches of government. They don't respect the judicial power. And ICE, other immigration agencies, and frankly now USCIS are rogue agencies. So we are going to continue, obviously, advocating, mobilizing, organizing, working with other organizations, litigating, whatever we need to do to make sure that not just immigrant youth, but our whole immigrant community, immigrants in this country are protected, and that their rights and their humanity are upheld.
ICE has started holding training sessions for civilians who want to become, I guess, junior George Zimmermans, and where you can learn how to use weapons and how to beat people up and how to arrest people and stuff. The Washington Post a couple of months ago, I think it was a column by Thomas Edsel, as I recall, but I could be wrong. But in any case, there was an extensive article about how Trump, because of the nature of ICE, it's kind of a quasi-independent agency that was carved out of HHS, or out of DHS, but has a level of unaccountability that Trump has embraced this organization and basically turned them into his own Praetorian Guard, his own equivalent of the Schutzstaffel, the SS, and his kind of private police force. And now they're training civilians to go out and bust heads. This is like scary stuff. And most recently here in Portland, over the weekend, we had a guy who was shot in the face and got a broken skull and broken face bones. He's still in the hospital, extensive surgery. We're not even sure he knows, that his brain is working, that he knows who he is or where he is. I mean, I haven't heard the most recent, but he was confused, was the description I read in the paper on Sunday. And we had Senator Ron Wyden on about this on Monday, condemning this. But it turns out that the federal police that Trump sent to Portland, that Trump was bragging about yesterday, were largely these ICE guys. What are you guys seeing about this quasi-independent federal police force? What the hell is going on here?
Yeah, I mean, this is just part of, the Trump administration's white supremacist agenda led by people like Stephen Miller to continue this war, these attacks on immigrants, right? And we've seen this just constant escalation of tactics such as this. Here in Florida, for example, in 2018, after they passed a bill that enhanced cooperation between local law enforcement and federal immigration authorities statewide, you saw something called the Warrant Service Officer Program that basically trained and deputized police officers in local jails to serve ICE warrants. And and this is another step to that, where now they've actually just bypassed law enforcement completely, and they're just training and giving authority to everyday people to just basically do vigilantism, right?
Right.
And it's scary. And it's frankly fascist, right? And another reason as to why Trump is a menace to this country, a menace to humanity, frankly, and needs to be repudiated
and to democracy. We're talking with Thomas Kennedy, the Florida state coordinator for UnitedWeDream.org, who basically told Ron DeSantis to leave town. We only have 30 seconds, Thomas, before we hit a hard break here. What is the state of politics in Florida? Do you think that DeSantis is going to go down? Do you think that the state could go blue?
I'm not sure. He's not up for election until 2022. But what I can tell you is he used to be seen as sort of like a moderate, very popular governor with high approval ratings. That was, of course, not true. But this latest crisis has really dented his reputation, and people are very angry. So, we'll see.
Well, let's hope change is in the air. Thomas Kennedy, UnitedWeDream.org is the website. You can see his actions on my Twitter feed and on his as well. His Twitter handle is TOMASKENN. Thomas, thanks so much for dropping by. Great talking with you.
Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Anytime. We'll be right back. It's 45 minutes past the hour here on the Thom Hartmann Program.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Back with your calls right after this. Stick around. And welcome back. Let's see here. Is it Johan in Van Nuys, California, or Johan?
Johan. Listen,
Johan.
Thank you for taking my call. I'd like to add something that, in addition to the post office, for years now, I've been writing on every envelope I send on the back, save our post office. And I wondered if we could all take that on, because very few people seem to realize, at least around me, they look at me cross-eyed when I say, do you know what's going to happen if we lose our post office? I just wondered if that was as good a suggestion. The other thing I'd like to mention is when we talk about the Kochs and Trump, can't we call them anarchists, because they are against all laws and regulation? And,
but they're not. They're not, Johan. They're totally in favor of putting you in jail if you're using drugs. They're totally in favor of smashing your face in and shooting you with rubber bullets if you're protesting their policies. There's all kinds of laws that they love very, very much.
For us, but not for them.
I would call them fascists. I would call them oligarchs. They're tyrants. These people are moving this country toward tyranny.
I'd also like to ask you if sometime you could have a show or recommend a book, because I don't have internet access. I only have my radio here, about Hobbes and his influence and relevancy today, his Calvinism, the extreme judgmental on other people and elitism and fate. this entitlement is all.
The book I'll just tell you right now, and I'm caveat. I'm only a third of the way through the book right now, but it is absolutely brilliant. It's by a fellow by the name of Bergman. That's his last name, Bergman, and it's called Humankind.
Okay.
Just that one word. And this book, at least the third that I have read so far, is probably one of the most astonishing books I've read in 30 or 40 years.
And have you read the book *Sapiens* at all?
Yes. Yeah, it's been a couple of years, but yeah.
What do you think of that quickly? I don't mean to take up time.
I don't recall, it wasn't *Sapiens* basically kind of a history of humanity sort of book?
Yes, but I got a little wary when I saw the recommendations from Gates and people like him. I started it, and then I started, whoa, this is a big book to read. Do I have time?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I don't, I have the book. I read the book when it was a New York Times bestseller, which was a couple of years ago, as I recall. And it didn't make that much of an impression on me. So,
okay. Well, I'm going to take your opinion,
Humankind is mind-boggling. And by the way, he starts out with Hobbes and Rousseau, and a little bit of John Locke. I would throw John Locke in there because he was kind of the guy in between Hobbes and Rousseau. And he was saying, well, yeah, maybe we have to, control human nature. But on the other hand, maybe human nature is good because we can govern ourselves. And here's how you do it. And that was his second treatise on government in the 1680s, or 1670. I think 1674 it was published. And that's this book is just mind-boggling. You're going to love it. I got to run, but thank you for the call.
Reagan doctrine is greed is good.
Yeah, absolutely. And that became the defining mantra for the 1980s. Joanne, thank you very much for the call, and thanks for listening to KPFK. We'll be back. It's 10 minutes before the hour. Stick around, or it will be short. Hey, we're putting together a series of American history books. It started with the hidden history of guns and the Second Amendment. Then we had the hidden history of the Supreme Court, the betrayal of America. Then the hidden history of the Republican war on voting. Coming out soon is the hidden history of monopolies, how big business destroyed the American dream. And then next spring, it's going to be the hidden history of oligarchy and tyranny. Hey, we have a brand new video up at ThomHartmann.com for the people who are subscribers or supporters to our program. And this one's about national health insurance and why and how we really need a single-payer national health care system, whether you call it Medicare for all, or you call it single-payer, or you call it whatever. Medicare for all, it has a lot of appeal because, generally speaking, Medicare is positively viewed. That's what they call it in Canada. It's called Medicare. And, which makes sense, care for people using medicine. We would save at least $150 billion a year just on billing. You've got hospitals in the United States that have entire floors devoted to billing. Hospitals in Canada have one desk with, one or two people sitting at that desk, handling the billing. It's just crazy. And people would get better care. They get more comprehensive care. Our entire nation gets healthier. And there's a whole bunch of essentially bullet points to build this argument for Medicare for all over at ThomHartmann.com. You can check it out right now. Oh, welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, and Blaine in Thousand Oaks, California. Hey, Blaine, what's up?
Tom, you're my hero. Listen, let me just touching on the humanity subject that you brought up and humankind. After years of watching videos of police shootings and the media fallout, and culminating in the George Floyd murder and weeks of national protests, how does it happen that soon after that, all the social upheaval, a black man's running away from a policeman in a parking lot. Now, freeze the moment. A decision has to be made right there and then. I mean, this cop doesn't live in a vacuum. I'm sure he's aware of the George Floyd. So let him harmlessly escape. You have his vehicle. Or do you shoot him in the back? And that's just a microcosm, watching all these, videos. The unfeeling brutality of the police and the emerging racism against blacks and Asians, the other. Now, is this inherent in mankind, the fear, the hate I see everywhere in people's eyes? Or if so, how do you legislate that out of people by, putting them in jail and charging them? How do you legislate who they basically are? And I personally think
you're looking at, Blaine, you're looking, kind of narrow. It's like a microscope, right? You're looking just at the person or just at people. And what you're missing is pulling back and taking a much larger view of culture and society, which is the milieu within which people live and exist. And then the secondary function of culture and society, which is to define the rules of conduct that are acceptable or unacceptable to us within that society. And so what you find is that, in our natural state, generally, with the exception of damaged goods people, Donald Trump is clearly somebody who is severely damaged by the way his father raised him, his mother's sickness and his mother's psychopathology. Mary Trump's book is just shocking in this regard. This man is damaged, and so it shouldn't surprise us that he does damaged things. But the larger picture is society as a whole, and so we have a society that for 8,000 years has embraced slavery, for example. Aristotle and Plato both argued that without slavery, civilization was impossible. This is how deep this is. It's in the Bible. Paul doesn't say free your slaves. I think it's in Thessalonians. He says treat them well. And so what we did was we created, as a subset of agriculture, we created this new category of person called an enslaved person or a slave. That institution has been with us for 8,000 years. It's only been a couple hundred years that it's been gone, which is amazing when you consider the long length of humanity on this planet. So it's not the individual people, it's the institutions that we set up in order to try to operate within our world. We're ideally suited to a hunting-gathering world, to a foraging world. If you look at hunting-gathering and foraging societies, they're highly functional. They are very egalitarian. Life is good. Ben Franklin wrote about this at some length. The biggest problem that the early settlers and colonists had was white people going to live with the Indians and never wanting to come back. And he, in fact, Franklin himself, he said, once a civilized person has tasted life with the Indians, they will never return. And it was true. Particularly women who found, essentially liberation, freedom, whereas in American society in the 1700s, in the 1600s, women were basically chattel property, unlike, not all that different from, quite, in some ways, obviously very different from, but they couldn't own property, they had no rights, they couldn't sue at court, they didn't even control their own children, or have any legal right over their children. If their husband died, they were given to another man to be in charge of them, all that kind of stuff. That was the state of things at the time of the Declaration of Independence. So we create these, and a lot of women were going, wait a minute, I'm out of here. Or not a lot, but enough that it's throughout the literature of that time. So the question is, how do you set up society in a way that works? And I think that, we're seeing 1,000 experiments over the last, 10,000 or 8,000 years, since Sumeria, really our first, known civilizations, or ancient China, ancient India. We've seen all these experiments, and it looks like the experiments that are the closest to the way that tribal people lived, that is, we all look out for all of us, countries like Denmark and Norway, those seem to be the most successful experiments in democracy and governance. And they're taking their lessons from indigenous people. Large chunks of the American Constitution were cobbled from the Iroquois Confederacy. But I refer you to this book, Humankind by Bergman. It's he lays all this stuff out.
But you don't think that there's an inherent fear then of the other, people that don't look like us, like a basic
yes, there is.
Human deep down. Yeah,
there is. There absolutely is, and that's a survival mechanism that's 3 million years old. But there are 1,000 ways to deal with that, and indigenous societies didn't go to war with each other. They collaborated, they cooperated, they interacted, we can do that again. Blaine, thank you for the call. We'll be back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
Monty Bennett was just another faceless right-wing millionaire on the long list.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are Raycon Earbuds. Stay at home with better sound. More info at raycon.com/Tom. Omega XL, which according to clinical research helps joints. More info at omegaxl.com/Tom. CB Distillery, CBD for sleeping. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. The Clean Phone Pro, phone sanitizer and charger. More info at thenewdealshop.com. Keeps hair loss treatment. More info at keeps.com/Tom. And Plexiderm Wrinkle Reducer. Real science, real results. More info at plexiderm.com, code TOM.
We say fight back!
We're reading today from the American Revolution of 1800 by Dan Sisson. He wrote the book 40 years ago. Recently, I went through, Dan and I actually went through, I wrote a foreword and an afterword to it and did some substantial editing on the book. And it's something you need to read. This is from the introduction, which I wrote. It is rare when a book about our early republic is relevant 40 years after it was originally published. It is rarer still when that book provides insight into national problems we refuse to solve 2 centuries later. You are therefore holding in your hands or reading on your pad or computer one of the most important books you will ever encounter. Here is why. Unlike other histories of this era, this book is written from a revolutionary perspective, much like Jefferson's generation viewed the world. The American Revolution of 1800 was not just about an election. It was about the life and death struggle for power between democratic-republican principles and oligarchic plutocratic values based on corruption. In short, this book, by implication, is about the identical crisis America faces today. The author's unique analysis is based on the idea of faction controlling party and how both undermine constitutional government. In an age where modern parties and the factions that control them have paralyzed our government, this book validates the politics of the founders. In still another contribution, the book demonstrates how preserving revolutionary ideas within our culture depends on understanding the classical tradition. The ability to recognize a demagogue is rooted deeply in the role Caesar played in destroying the Republic of ancient Rome. That fear of a Caesar inspired Jefferson and others to organize citizens against the Federalists, thereby completely contradicting the political rules of their time. This book, above all, presents a profoundly positive view of Jefferson and his creativity in the midst of crisis. It celebrates his gift 24 years after he wrote the Declaration of Independence and proves he never abandoned his principles or his revolutionary vision for America's future. Ironically, it's become a cliche in political and economic circles that while we love Thomas Jefferson, we live in a country largely run by Alexander Hamilton's policies and John Adams's politics. This may have been more true of the roughly 200 years before the contemporary free trade era, beginning in the 1970s under Richard Nixon and exploding in the mid-1990s when Bill Clinton signed NAFTA. Alexander Hamilton must be rolling over in his grave. Nevertheless, we have become a mercantilist nation dominated by banks and big industries as Hamilton envisioned. It is true that there were huge differences between Hamilton and Jefferson, particularly in their visions for the future of America and its economy. And those divisions tend to dominate interpretations of our political discussion when we reference the era of our first few presidents. But a much larger and more dramatic battle of worldviews played out in the late 1790s between President John Adams and Vice President Thomas Jefferson, leading directly to what is arguably the most transformational presidential election in the history of the United States, the election of 1800. In other books and places, both Dan Sisson and I have written at some length about the differences between these two men and their respective visions of America. Adams relished throwing newspapers editors in prison and demanded that when he and his wife visited a town, the local militia come out to fire their cannons in salute of him and shout, "God save President Adams." Jefferson was so horrified by Adams's Alien and Sedition Acts that he left town the day they were signed into law, and as president often wore simple homespun garments. He was known to answer the front door of the White House in his bathrobe, and more than one visitor mistook him for a servant. As president, Jefferson literally acted out his egalitarian visions of America. In my book, The Crash of 2016, The Plot to Destroy America and What We Can Do to Stop It, I describe Jefferson's concern over aristocracy in American politics. On October 28, 1813, in a letter to his old rival John Adams, Jefferson commented on his distrust of America's growing wealthy elite, naming in particular the Senate, which was not then democratically elected by the people. Referring to the, quote, cabal in the Senate of the United States, end quote, Jefferson wrote, "You, John Adams, think it best to put the pseudo-aristoi into a separate chamber of legislation, the Senate, where they may be hindered from doing their mischief by their coordinate branches, and where also they may be a protection to wealth against the agrarian and plundering enterprises of the majority of the people." Then Jefferson countered in the letter, writing, "I do not believe them, the Senate, necessary to protect the wealthy, because enough of them will find their way into every branch of the legislation to protect themselves." Instead, Jefferson wrote, "I think the best remedy is exactly that provided by all our constitutions, to leave to the citizens the free election. In general, they will elect the really good and wise. In some instances, wealth may corrupt and birth blind them, but not in sufficient degree to endanger society." And in a final warning about the largely Federalist cabal in the Senate, these would be the conservatives of their time, Jefferson wrote, quote, "The artificial aristocracy is a mischievous ingredient in government, and provision should be made to prevent its ascendancy. I think that to give them power in order to prevent them from doing mischief is arming them for it, and increasing instead of remedying the evil." In a 1786 letter to George Washington, Jefferson gave his most explicit warning about this threat of a military allied with the plutocracy within, and advocated for unwavering vigilance against it. Quote, "Though the day may be at some distance, beyond the reach of our lives perhaps, yet it will certainly come, when a single fiber left of this institution will produce an hereditary aristocracy which will change the form of our governments from the best to the worst in the world." Queen-size bed watching the television that sat in the corner of my mother's wooden vanity dresser. Moving Forward by Corinne Jean-Pierre.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. I don't know if you caught this mess that was happening in the White House yesterday. This was truly bizarre. Where Donald Trump comes out, he was talking about China specifically, and I want to get to that in just a second. But then he goes off on Joe Biden. That's illegal. I mean, it's literally, I don't think a single president in my lifetime has ever done this. There's a law against this. It's called the Hatch Act, which says that you can't use federal property for campaign purposes. You can't, from a member of Congress's office, can't conduct campaign activities. You've got to go to a separate place to do that. When we were doing our show from Washington, D.C., in the first couple of years we were in D.C., we were in a building right down the street, about a half a block or maybe a block and a half away from Union Station. And it was about 2 blocks from I believe the Rayburn House building, the office building, and or maybe it was the Hart Senate building, because a number of, I almost named some of them, but there was, just one elevator in our building, and I was constantly in the elevator with senators. And they were going to these little rooms. This was a 6th-floor building, and they were going to these little rooms that they rented to do their electioneering, to call, dial for dollars and things. And in fact, most of the ones that I met were Democrats in the elevator. Well, Trump broke that law yesterday. His daughter, yesterday was Bastille Day. His daughter had her penultimate let them eat cake Marie Antoinette moment with her new website about find something new, right? You've lost your job? Well, hey, why don't you just become a broadcast engineer? Yeah, that's one of the categories they're recommending people check out. I'll tell you, I'm in the broadcasting industry. Clear Channel, now called iHeartMedia, just did another huge round of layoffs. There's no jobs for broadcast engineers that I know of. I mean, it's just, and it just goes on and on. So this weird stuff, I mean, this was kind of the psychodrama background yesterday to the weird stuff. But in the middle of this was some very serious stuff that I've been talking about on this program for some time now. And I point out when it kind of pops above the surface, but, like an iceberg bobbing in the water, most of it is not visible and doesn't get talked about that much. Specifically, last week I shared with you how in the South China Sea, we had 2 aircraft carrier groups, 2 battle groups, that were moving into areas that China had claimed for itself. And we provided them with a list of areas that we say, we're not recognizing your sovereignty here. And the Chinese response to that was to tweet out a statement about the 2 new weapon systems that they have that are specifically designed to blow aircraft carriers and destroyers out of the water. Mini submarine-based systems and missile systems that would just take us out. And basically what they said is, you think you're going to, sail through Chinese waters? You're only doing it because we're letting you. And if things were serious right now, you would be dead. Because we control these waters. Well, that was last week. This week, Congress passed this law I'm not sure exactly when it passed. I believe it was a couple of weeks ago. But it was the, let me get the name here. It was a sanction, it was called the Hong Kong Autonomy Act. And basically what the Hong Kong Autonomy Act does is it authorizes the administration. And Congress passes laws, and then the executive branch, the president's branch, carries those laws out. And it authorized the president to put sanctions on Chinese companies, on the government of China itself, and on Chinese individuals. And that was the whole point of Trump's Rose Garden speech yesterday. That was what it was supposed to be about, was his saying that, we're going to be tough. He says, I'm the toughest president ever on China. Because he thinks that his campaign is going to be all about Joe Biden and China. In fact, I'm seeing ads right here in the Portland media market where they're clips from Joe Biden 20 years ago talking about how great international trade is. And yeah, Biden's always been a free trade guy by and large, but still, he's not totally crazy. But Trump is going to try and portray Trump, who's manufacturing his Trump products in China as we speak, says he's going to take on China. And so he came out and he basically trashed China for what they're doing in Hong Kong. And China now today says we're going to retaliate. And I mean, this is serious stuff. China on Wednesday said that they vowed to retaliate, saying that the Hong Kong Autonomy Act, quote, maliciously slanders its Hong Kong security law, which is being used right now to round up pro-democracy advocates in Hong Kong and throw them in jail, and their families. And they're also arresting the families of Chinese people who are outside of China in order to force those people to go back to China, where they will be put in prison. Saudi Arabia has done this for years. A lot of autocratic regimes do this. You hold families hostage. And Beijing is saying, okay, that's it. We're going to punish you back. And China is now threatening to put sanctions on some people inside the Trump administration. But the point where I wanted to take this is that I think that we've gone beyond the edge here. When the month that I lived in China back in November of 1988, I believe. No, it was November of 1987. At that time, I was studying acupuncture at a hospital in China, and I was living in that hospital. In fact, one of the guys who was one of my roommates sent me an email earlier this week. I haven't heard from him in years. He's a psychiatrist, and he was there studying acupuncture also. Brilliant guy. Name is Pablo. But in any case, and we had 2 Japanese roommates too. But at that time, the tallest building in Beijing was the 10-story Marriott or Hyatt or Hilton, whatever. I think it was a Hilton, actually. And it had a pizza restaurant and a steakhouse in it. And that was the place where people went to eat, right? Although, for literally 2 or 3 cents, you could get a just great Chinese meal, which we did almost every single day. But it was a very poor country at that time in 1987. And now its economy is rivaling the United States, and soon will surpass us. So isn't it time to say, okay, we built China by moving all our jobs there and moving all our companies there? Obviously not all of them, but so many of them. And, let's reverse that, because China is not a democracy. But this breast beating, this chest thumping stuff, that's the kind of stuff that leads to war. Don't we have the ability to say, yeah, that country may have a crappy form of government, but it's not our job to change it? We walked away from Vietnam in 1975, and, Vietnam actually has not had a single COVID death because they locked down early, they did masks, they did testing, they've got aggressive contact tracing. Now, Vietnam's not a government I don't want to live under. It's a communist dictatorship, essentially, but we were able to let them continue to survive after dropping more bombs on them than in all of World War II. I mean, isn't it time to say, okay, enough already? We're just going to disengage from China and Saudi Arabia and some of these other countries as well. What do you think?
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
I'm really concerned that this I Claudius stuff is going to lead to World War III. I'm really concerned about this. And welcome back. Corky in Rochester, New York. Hey, Corky, what's up?
No, not much. Following up on that guy's call, I too was a union steward for 6 years, and I understand why they're trying to get rid of the post office. And
you were with the post office, Corky?
No, I was a Teamster.
Oh, okay.
But I understand why they're getting and how they're doing it. Is what they do is they get a couple names where people are talking about unions. They bring them in, make them the supervisor. Now they're part of management. They can't be involved with the union activities anymore. So they learned a lesson. But that $50 billion for 75 years is outrageous. How can we as a society allow that to happen?
Well, it's called Republicans. So, Corky, is your point that the reason why one of the main reasons why Trump and the Republicans have been going after the post office so aggressively since 2006 isn't just that they tried to come out with a green fleet of vehicles, and isn't just because they're a highly functional form of branch of government that's mentioned in the Constitution, but principally it's because they're the largest employer in the United States?
Yes, because when you get a voting block that big, you can harm an election for a Republican election. And they want to do away with all those voting blocks that big.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
yeah,
I
get
know,
it. Go ahead.
Can you tell me, have you ever read Noam Chomsky?
I have, yes.
I think he was a gem in our society, and they just packed him and put him away.
Oh, Noam Chomsky's still around.
I know, but when you walk into a bookstore, his books are way in the back on the bottom shelf. They're not obvious to anybody.
Yeah, yeah.
That's what I mean about pack them away.
I don't know if you've tried to read any of Noam Chomsky's larger and longer books, but the guy's a professor of linguistics. In fact, his writings on linguistics are absolutely fascinating. As an old NLP guy, which is all about linguistics, I find it fascinating. But it is dense. Chomsky really became famous in the I believe it was the early 90s when this small publishing company came out with short, abbreviated versions, excerpts basically of his longer works, and that made it accessible to people. But Chomsky's still around, Corky, and Chomsky's a really, really smart guy, and he's got a lot to say. He still has a lot to say, and I think he must be pushing 80.
Yeah, but they buried him away, so very few people have ever heard of a guy that's written so much on the minute. Did you know why he went to writing political books?
No, I don't.
He told the story that when he was young and his best friend got bullied and beat up, that he ran away. He didn't stay and help defend him. And that laid heavy on his mind all his life. And then he went to writing political things because he wasn't afraid of the bullies anymore.
And he wanted to defend the underdog. Amazing story. Corky, thank you for sharing that with me. It's nice to hear from you. We'll be back. It's it's coming up on 20 minutes past the hour here on the Thom Hartmann Program, occupying the media 3 hours a day, 5 days a week, right here. Stick around. We'll be right back. Our 1 hour free podcast recaps our show, and it's available wherever fine podcasts are found. And we have the full 3 hour podcast available over at thomhartmann.com if you want to really support our program. It's that time of year where we celebrate Memorial Day. We memorialize the Americans who have died in our wars, in the Vietnam War, in the Iraq War, in the Afghanistan War, in the Gulf War, the earlier Iraq War, in the Korean War. If you add all of those wars together that I just named, the sum total of them is fewer than the number of people who have died in 3 months from COVID-19 virus on Donald Trump's watch. Isn't it time for us to memorialize the Americans who have died and are continuing to die at the rate of, well over 1,000 a day as a result of the incompetence of Donald Trump? It seems like maybe it's a good idea. Maybe it's the time to add COVID-19 victims. Because, after all, Trump says we're warriors, or maybe there should be a separate holiday. But something to think about. You'll find a video about it over at thomhartmann.com. Excuse me. Welcome back. The lack of guidance from Washington, D.C. is mind-boggling. I mean, we have school districts around the country that are making absolutely stupid decisions based on politics. In Los Angeles, the Los Angeles Unified School District and San Diego, between the two of them, over 800,000 students, they have said this fall we're not going to have in-person classes. We just don't know enough yet. I mean, this is a brand new virus. We're just figuring the thing out. We're just getting a sense of what it is, how it works, what it does, what the lasting effects are, how contagious it is. We need a little more information. We can wait a little while. We don't have to kill people. And in fact, there's a really good study that was just published. Mark Sumner is summarizing this over at Daily Kos. Two studies. One was published in Nature last month. The other was published this last week in Social Science Research Network. And both of them said that the stay-at-home orders from March saved somewhere between 900,000 and 2.7 million American lives. If 75% of our population gets this virus and it's got a 4% fatality rate, which is about where it is generally, that's 9.8 million dead Americans. Turns out the cure is not worse than the disease. You know, Trump said, oh, the cure is worse than the disease, the cure being locking down. No, it's not. So here you have two school districts that are basically run by, well, actually, I don't know. San Diego is a very red town. It may be run by Republicans. But San Diego and Los Angeles said, no, we're not going to bring kids into classrooms and teachers into classrooms. But Orange County is like, you know, the reddest part of California. Orange County is famous for being Republican. They have over 25,000 confirmed COVID cases in Orange County. That's more than 19 states in the United States. That's more than all of Japan. That's twice the number of South Korea. And Monday night, the Orange County Board of Education met to decide whether they were going to bring back kids and teachers and things. The Board of Education is mostly Republicans, and by a 4-1 vote, they said, yep, we're going to put those kids in with the teachers, and we're just going to see what happens. Are we going to appropriate money for masks or mandate masks? No. Are we going to appropriate money for social distancing to, you know, open up our classrooms or change the HVAC systems in our schools so the entire school doesn't end up a giant petri dish? No. We're just going to do what Trump said. We're just going to open the schools. We're good Republicans. I mean, this is nuts. And this myth that children can't get COVID-19 is a myth. It's a lie. Not only do they get it, they die from it. And those who don't die from it get injured by it, and probably injured for life. They're getting little mini strokes and things. But, you know, Trump is still saying, oh, no, we've got to... See, this is the problem when we have no leadership, nothing from the top down. And I really think that the schools are going to be, this is the Waterloo. You know, Trump saying, it's been what, 20 days now since it was reported that Russia was paying to bounties on U.S. troops. Donald Trump hasn't mentioned that once. He's mentioned Confederate statues a lot, but he hasn't mentioned that once. So, you know, and a lot of Americans are just kind of, particularly Republicans, they're just kind of shrugging their shoulders and saying, well, you know, yeah, I don't have anybody in my family in the military, so it's not a big deal. And it's kind of died in the media. So, you know, and if he's going after protesters and you've got a half a dozen or so people who have lost their eyes because these police are shooting, you know, all the guidelines say if you're going to shoot rubber bullets, shoot below the waist or shoot, you know, lower in the body, mostly the legs, you know, to slow people down, but not to kill them or hurt them. You hit them in the neck, you can kill them. You hit them in the face, you can take out an eye. Well, that's happened over and over and over again. Well, you know, that's just the protesters. But now you're coming after kids. Now Trump wants to set up a situation that could kill your children. And there are Republicans all over this country, particularly white suburban women. I mean, everybody else had pretty much figured this out, right? But white suburban women are going, oh? You know, like Scooby-Doo, what? Really? You want my kid to go to school, get COVID, bring it home, and give it to me? Is that your plan? Just so that you can say that you beat the virus somehow, magically? I think this is going to be Trump's Waterloo. But, you know, he's got plan B. And that is, instead of having hospitals send information to the Centers for Disease Control, he's going to have hospitals send information about, you know, who's dying and of what. To Alex Azar, the former Lilly executive, the former pharmaceutical executive who doubled the price of insulin. He runs HHS. Alex Azar, a good Trumpy. He's a good Trump humper. he'll do good by these numbers. And Trump wants the National Guard to go get the information.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Yeah, nothing makes hospital administrators feel warm and fuzzy like guys with rifles showing up to get data. Back with your calls after this.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is by N.B. Turner. It's titled, Is China an Imperialist Country? And it's from a relatively Marxist point of view. I think you'll find it fascinating. This is from the introduction. It has long been known and understood that the entire world has been under the control of capitalist imperialism. For a time, a section of this world broke from it, beginning with the victory of socialism in Russia and continuing through the Chinese Revolution, constituting a socialist world. Yet in time, the socialist countries, through internal class struggles in politics and economics, were seized by capitalist conciliators and advocates, and then by capitalists themselves, who were largely within the ruling communist parties themselves. First in Russia and later in China, when these counter-revolutions and coups took place, there ensued a period of entry and integration into the world imperialist system. The Soviet Union, at first under the existing signboard of socialism, continued much of its established national and economic power relations into a new socialist imperialist bloc, socialist in name, imperialist in reality. The Russian capitalist imperialist attempt to maintain this bloc, or important sections of what had been part of this bloc and its historic allies, has continued in the years since the socialist signboard was discarded. In China, the defeat of the proletariat and the capitalist capture of state power after the death of the great revolutionary Mao Zedong have also led to a period of integration into the world imperialist system. China still operates under a socialist signboard, but has conducted itself unambiguously as a capitalist power. Before the last decade, especially since the demise of the socialist bloc, the U.S. was commonly seen as the sole superpower to which all other powers had to defer. The system which the U.S. had designed at the end of World War II was global in scope and to some more democratic in appearance than the old colonial empires. But it was built around the elitist privilege of power and authority, meaning the U.S. as superpower was at the centerpiece of the controls. But in the last decade, the imperialist world system is not what it used to be. Throughout the world, corrupt and comprador regimes have faced significant and often unprecedented mass popular opposition movements which have revealed the deep instability of the old neo-colonialist arrangements. Even in the EU, the product of imperialist designs to supplant the historic internecine battles, there has emerged ever-deepening crises and conflicts and movements to assert nationalist interests against one another. Against the threat of Islamic fundamentalism, the imperialist system was directed by the U.S., has launched wars such as in Iraq and Afghanistan at huge cost, trillions of dollars, and immeasurable losses in political credibility and imperialist authority, as neither war has won any of the U.S.'s objectives. These clear failures at the hand of the largest and most powerful military force in the world do not bode well for maintaining the U.S.'s hegemonic domination of the world's imperialist system. And the economic and financial crises of the last half-decade or more have stirred not only deep discontent, resentment, and popular political opposition within the ranks of the U.S.'s reliable allies, but it has brought to the fore the imperialist anti-U.S. challenges from other major powers, specifically China and Russia. Forces worldwide are studying these changes and considering how they must change the set of options at hand. The all-too-prevalent view that U.S. imperialism is so powerful, so dominant, and so capable of manipulating all manner of forces and bending them to its will has been, and continues to be, a dangerous twisting of reality. The sole superpower in this view has been attributed with omnipotent features that defy effective challenge, that reflect a supposedly skillful control of contradictions and crises that afflicted earlier empires, and that has a boundless ability to disguise its malevolent work. If it were true, it would be a remarkable development in human history. Indeed, it would be, as once touted in the time of the collapse of the Soviet Union and bloc by Francis Fukuyama, the end of history. That is, the end of historical conflict and systemic changes. It would be an expression of the boastful and fanciful capitalist post-Mao motto, Tina, there is no alternative to capitalism. There are others who assert that the U.S. is not so omnipotent and that it is in decline and maybe failing, but that the U.S. and its close allies constitute the only imperialism that matters, and that if all its detractors, victims, opponents, and its imperialist rivals band together, liberation will truly be achieved with the demise of U.S. imperialism. This view also holds that whenever big powers like China or Russia rise in opposition to the U.S., they deserve the support and applause from progressive and revolutionary forces. Holding this view are a variety of forces who cling to the notion that the Cold War division of the world is still extant, and that popular protests in recent years from Libya to Syria, Ukraine, and Venezuela, as well as Brazil and Turkey, Iran, even inside Western China, are all examples of U.S. meddling and desperate interference. This view holds that without such U.S. manipulation and interference and disruption, the people would, by and large, be happy or passive. This is by any measure an amazing claim, denying the existence of class contradictions and struggles within each of these countries, and making it appear that the conspiratorial powers of the U.S. to manipulate events are unparalleled in reach and effectiveness. In practical political terms, this view distorts the basic reality. Is China an imperialist country?
On the science revolution this week, can Americans stop the Republican Party and their billionaire buddies before another 100,000 Americans die from COVID-19? Dr. Michael Mann is here, and I'm asking him about the new climate models that are projecting even more extreme warming. Are they correct? Remington Gregg, the Council for Public Citizen, joins me on how the coronavirus continues to spread, yet there are no enforceable health standards coming out of this administration. Also, Chloe Waterman with Friends of the Earth drops by on how we stop meatpacking plants from killing us. Find the Science Revolution wherever fine podcasts are available. Hey, we have a new video over at thomhartmann.com for people who are supporters of our program. On this one, I'm digging into, or actually kind of taking issue with, a new article that's over on thenation.com titled, Could Coronavirus End Globalization? And they've got a bunch of analysts who are weighing in on this sort of thing. And my take is that this is going to be even bigger than that. This depression that we are sliding into, it is being softened right now by the Federal Reserve throwing $6 trillion at America's largest corporations. 1/3 of all economic activity for a year in the United States. Twice the annual federal budget. The Fed has just parked $6 trillion with a couple of hundred big companies. And it's just masking what's coming. It's going to get bad, and it could become fascist. And so check it out. It's over at thomhartmann.com, for the people who support our program. Thank you. Welcome back. Breaking news. You will recall, what was it, 2 weeks ago? Trump did his thing in Tulsa, Oklahoma. As I recall, I'm terrible with time. I can never, the difference. When I look back at the past, and was that 2 weeks ago or was that a month and a half ago? I almost, more than half the time, I can't tell the difference. And I've just been that way my whole life. I think, some people are like really smart with some things and really stupid with others, and I'm really stupid with time. But in any case, whenever he was in Oklahoma, in Tulsa, doing his little 6,000 person rally in a 9,000 person arena, the governor of Oklahoma, Kevin Stitt, was there. S-T-I-T-T, the Republican governor. He was there in the crowd. He wasn't wearing a mask. And it was just reported hours ago that Oklahoma Governor Kevin Stitt confirms that he has now tested positive for COVID-19. It's happening. I mean, they've already confirmed that a lot of these cases in Oklahoma, specifically in the Tulsa area particularly, can be traced right back to Donald Trump's gig. So here we are. Randy in Ottawa, Iowa. Hey, Randy, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. I've been wanting to get in touch with you for a couple of weeks. there's something that's been bothering me, and I think it's the elephant in the room, or one of the elephants in the room besides COVID, and it's the economics. And you, just by coincidence, when you commented earlier, let's reverse the Chinese economic buildup. That's what Joni Ernst is fighting for now in this election season against our Democratic opponent, or her Democratic opponent. The reason I called today is that I wanted to know if you remembered the legislation that this was inserted into. That would be the tax incentives for outsourcing manufacturing to China. It would have been in 05, 06 under the George Bush administration.
I believe it was the tail end of the Clinton administration, and it was giving China permanent most favored nation status with regard to trade, or permanent, it was PNTR. Bernie used to rave about this on this program, permanent normal trade relations, PNTR.
I don't believe so.
You don't think it was Clinton, it was Bush?
No, this was in 2005, 2006, and it was specific legislation that gave tax incentives to corporations that outsource jobs. And the Democrats tried to reverse that in 2009 before they got thrown out in 2010. But they failed.
Randy, I don't know the details on that. If you can find them, send them to me, and I'll report on them here. There have been a lot of stages to this thing, and China's done a very good job of having their people lobbying the United States, and American companies, have just basically betrayed their country, and
true,
here we are.
True. The point is that this Ernst, what they're not saying is, I think this goes clear back to, do you remember the term that the Republicans were using, public-private partnerships? I think this goes back to, and I think this is evolving into a situation where the Republicans are going to reverse their drastic free trade initiatives and their corporate subsidies for outsourcing by using taxpayer dollars to bring those jobs back or bring that manufacturing back. And there's this catch there was obvious. Do you remember the carrier incident in Indiana where Trump tried to save the jobs?
Right, and they shipped them overseas anyway. They shipped them to Mexico, though, didn't they?
Yeah, they went to Mexico. But in that deal, see, that was a revolving door of tax dollars. The federal government was subsidizing tax subsidies to carrier to outsource those jobs to Mexico, but yet Indiana ended up getting stuck giving tax subsidies to carrier to keep the jobs here. And what happened is that the carrier was going to get more money for sending the jobs to Mexico, which you just pointed out. They ended up sending those jobs out anyways, the majority of them, 2/3 of them.
Yeah.
And
this is
because they were, yep.
I was just going to say, Randy, this is just an elaborate game that corporations have been playing for the last 20, 30, 40 years, in a big way the last 20 years, because they have been empowered. I mean, this is actually what you're talking about here is at the core of my book that's coming out in a few weeks, Oligarchy, Monopoly, Hidden History of Monopoly, and how big corporations stole the American dream. And that's essentially it. They bought the Republican Party, and then they had the Republican Party make everything more profitable for corporations. To hell with the American worker. In fact, they don't even particularly like the American worker. They only want American workers to have enough money to buy their products. Period. Full stop. And pick your company.
Yep, and it's happened so slowly. It's evolved so slowly that if you really don't put it in context and take the long point of view, it's really hard to see it. But it's scary. This bring jobs back, and they're going to give them more tax subsidies to do it.
Now, I remember when this thing started back in the 1970s. I was living in Michigan, which was, we made cars in Michigan, and Toyota and Honda started selling really, really cheap, junky cars in the United States. This was in the 70s. And if you had one of those cars, and I had bought one used for $35, I was very proud of the fact that for about the first 10 years that I was driving, I never paid more than $35 for a car. And wherever I parked, it would get keyed. I mean, it was just covered with key marks. If you had a foreign car, your car was going to get keyed. It was just like, that was part of the price of having a foreign car. And that was and there were books about, China, rising, and Japan. This was Japan at that time. That was in the 70s. And then, of course, in the 90s, it was China. And but Randy, I got to move along. But this is a serious issue that we got to pay some attention to. Kathy in Madison, Wisconsin, you wanted to correct me on the Hatch Act?
Yes, sir. Thank you for taking my call. It doesn't apply to the president and the vice president. They're exempt. However, there are some things that they can't do. They really can't recruit other people to violate the act who are not covered by it. The thing is, there's a lot of other people that are also exempt, like high-level people in the cabinet, that kind of thing, so it gets a little murky. They are also supposed to be reimbursing the government for any expenses that they incur while they are engaged in, political activity.
Yeah, I mean, the reason for this, Kathy, was so that if the president wants to fly to a fundraiser, he's going to fly on Air Force One. There's expenses associated with that. The campaigns used to reimburse. But yeah, no, I get it, and I'm familiar with that. Thank you, Kathy. And by the way, Ivanka yesterday was saying, "Oh, buy Goya." This is these Mexican food products because the president of the company has endorsed Trump. That, I think, was a violation of the Hatch Act, too, although Ivanka doesn't take a paycheck, so I don't know. Steve in St. Louis. Hey, Steve, what's up?
Hey, Tom. How you doing?
Good. What's on your mind?
Yeah. You were referring to World War III earlier as to Donald Trump possibly starting a war. That may be a diversion, but, I think this whole ballot by mail, I believe, is it December 15th that all the states have to be certified?
I don't recall. It's in December, yeah.
Okay. Do you think he would have the postmaster hold up the mail until after that certification? I mean, can he actually do that?
I don't think anything's going to happen like that at some sort of, command, top-down federal level. I think what's more likely to happen is if the post office, basically system-wide, but in particular in big cities, which are democratic cities by and large, starts, the mail service starts getting all screwy, as apparently it has happened, is already happening, then you're going to have states that are going to say, well, 20% of our mail-in ballots came in the day after the deadline, so we can't certify them. And that could throw it to the House of Representatives.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
We'll be back with more of your calls in just a moment. It's 45 minutes past the hour. It's the Thom Hartmann Program, taking back the mainstream media 3 hours a day, 5 days a week. We're right here with you. And welcome back. Sue in Sonoma, California. Hey, Sue, you wanted to step off Blaine's call about human nature?
Yes. Yes. And it's Sonora, not Sonoma.
Oh, Sonora.
Anyway.
I'm sorry.
Yeah. Anyway, hi. I've been thinking about this and wanted to ask you about it ever since, the Black Lives Matter and the racial justice. It seems like only in the United States was the whole concept of slavery and racism conflated together so that it became, like a specific race was enslaved and it was forever for them. And that wasn't really true in the history of, like you said, there was slavery in the world for a long time. Like the Romans had slaves, but they were all different races, all different cultures, and you could leave slavery. And all this kind of stuff. I mean, I'm not saying it's a good thing, but I'm just saying that our peculiar institution is that we made it connected to one race, and that somehow these other people, the white people, were better. What do you think about that?
Well, no, you're right, Sue, and it's part of how evil this system was
Right.
if you go back 500 or 1,000 years in Europe where slavery was practiced, but it was largely the tribe down the hillside got lost in a war, and now they're slaves.
Now they're spotted.
Within a generation or two, they all kind of look the same, and it's hard to tell who was a slave and who wasn't.
Exactly.
But if you could, if people are identified as slaves purely by the color of their skin, then not only can they never escape it, but their descendants can never escape it. I mean, it's like, taking the level of evil up one whole giant step. And I don't think that the United States was entirely unique in this. I think that in a lot of places where you had different races coming into contact with each other, as there's a long history of this along the borders, the southwestern border of China and the northeastern border of the Indian subcontinent. You've got this kind of thing happening. I mean, there's a number of places where there was racialized slavery. And I think, frankly, the Greeks were using a certain level of racialized slavery. But we turned it into this very, very sophisticated thing. And it would be interesting. I've never read a really good study of, comparing the institution of slavery across cultures and across countries over a period of a couple thousand years. I think that would be a fascinating study. And I'm guessing probably, multiple books have been written on it. And I just haven't had the occasion to read one. Yeah.
Well, I've been interested in Republican Rome, and that whole culture just fascinates me, and that's where I first started thinking about it.
There were more slaves in the Roman Republic than there were citizens. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And the same thing was true of Greece, by the way. There were more slaves in Athens and during the Athenian democracy than there were citizens, and there were more slaves generally in.
They were more integrated into the society, kind of. So, way. Anyway, thank you.
And I mean, thank you, Sue. It's a huge topic. It's really a huge topic. One of these days we should probably get a scholar of this on and educate all of us. It's coming up on 10 minutes before the hour. We'll be right back with more of your calls in just a minute. Hey, we're putting together a series of American history books. It started with the hidden history of guns and the Second Amendment. Then we had the hidden history of the Supreme Court, the betrayal of America. Then the hidden history of the Republican war on voting. Coming out soon is the hidden history of monopolies, how big business destroyed the American dream. And then next spring, it's going to be the hidden history of oligarchy and tyranny. We have a new video over at thomhartmann.com for the people who support our program, and it's an interesting one. The phrase, pull yourself up by your bootstraps, has a really interesting history. And the exploitation of that phrase and that history by right-wingers in 20th century America, or late 20th century America, now 21st century America, also has a fascinating and rather grim history. Just the general absurdity of the idea that somebody can lift themselves off the ground by reaching down and pulling on a strap on their boots. I mean, just think about it for a second. But it's used. This is used as justification by right-wingers, particularly over the last 40 years since the Reagan Revolution, to say, poor people, their poverty is their own fault. Check it out. It's over at thomhartmann.com. And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Rhonda in Charleston, West Virginia. Hey, Rhonda, what's on your mind today?
Hi, hello. I want to thank you first for providing a forum for all of us who are in this right way of thinking. I've got a question. I teach at an area high school in an area that probably will not be wearing face masks, that type of thing. Scared out of my mind, to say the least. I've got 6 months to retirement. I mean, needless to say, I'm elderly. what do you think might be the chances that maybe nationwide, it wouldn't be a teacher strike, but teachers possibly saying, hey, no, we need to go online at this time due to the lack of evidence and of what's going on?
I would keep a close eye on the three big teachers unions. I believe there's three. There's the NEA,
AFT,
National Education Association.
EA, and NEA, yes.
Yeah, there you go. I would keep a careful eye on all three of those teachers unions because I am guessing, just a guess, but I am guessing that as we get closer to this, and it's going to start getting very real in about 2 weeks or 3 weeks when there's a couple of states that actually open their schools in August. But as we get closer to this, I think we're going to start seeing teachers unions saying, wait a minute, you're telling us to go back into class. We're fine with that if we did it the way that they do it in Taiwan right now, which is that the local area has very, very little COVID infection. The kids coming into my school are tested every day. There's no more than 10 kids in a classroom. The teacher stays with those kids from the time they arrive until the time they leave at the end of the day so they don't mix with other kids in the school, that they eat their meals in the classroom. So again, we're not mixing with other kids in the school. The teachers' lounge has been closed off. We're virtually connecting with each other when it comes to things like teachers' conferences and things. And there's just a whole bunch of very common sense steps. Oh, and the HVAC system in the school has been retrofitted or upgraded so that it's got UV lights in it so that as it's recirculating air through the school, it's also killing any viruses that might be in that air. All of those things can be done. The problem is they're all going to cost money. And at the same time that Trump and Republicans are saying we need to get back to school, they're saying we can't send any more money. In fact, Betsy DeVos is trying to cut funding to public schools and move that money into private schools. So my guess is, Rhonda, that you're going to start seeing the teachers union saying, okay, fine, we'll do it if you do this. And then, of course, the government and the local school boards will say, well, we can't do that. Our tax base is falling apart. People aren't working. We don't have any money. We can't do that. And so you're going to have a de facto strike, effectively. I also would be very surprised if anything larger than a very small number of teachers over 40 go back to work. You're going to have a lot of people, taking early retirement or claiming disability or whatever it may be. And frankly, I'm guessing, depending on, it'll vary from part of the country to part of the country, the places that have been hit hard by COVID, I'd be surprised if even a third of the parents say, okay, fine, I'll send my kids to school. I think, parents are scared of this. Teachers are scared of this. I mean, there's a whole bunch of other shoes that are going to drop, Rhonda.
And I'm hoping we're all white-knuckling it here. And I'm in a state with very low caseload. However, our R value, is that what they call the R value, the infection rate, is more than 50% up over the last couple of weeks. So therefore, we're white-knuckling and 6 months within retirement. So it is where I'm at, and it's extremely. And I'm in a field, special needs, where they probably will not be wearing masks, and so it's just extremely scary. And I can't be the only one, I'm wondering, as a nation. And we're not striking for more money. I mean, West Virginia was one of the first states to ever go out on strike for money and that type of thing, and health care and that type of thing. Mm-hmm. But now we're looking at our life or death situation, and it becomes a little different. So
yeah, I absolutely get it. And I think this is going to probably shake out well, but we'll see. We'll see. I wish you the very best, Rhonda. I would be scared if I was you too. And and I'm sure that there's teachers all over the country who are just, very, very concerned about this. Yeah. Thank you very much for the call, Rhonda. Thank you. I wish you the best. John in Denver. John, got a minute to the end of the hour. What's up?
Tom, isn't the essence of slavery deeply embedded in capitalism?
To an extent. I mean, I think you could argue that slavery is loss of personal agency, loss of personal control over your own life. And so those things that make people less dependent on capitalists, things like, free healthcare, free education, guaranteed housing, the things that they have, for example, in Denmark, those make you more free and less likely to end up a, quote, wage slave. But let's not diminish the horrors of chattel slavery, by just casually comparing it to capitalism or casually comparing capitalism to that. The horrors of chattel slavery as it was practiced in the United States are an order or several orders of magnitude worse than the worst excesses of capitalism. But I get your point, John. But I think that it's like comparing things to the Holocaust. You just there are some comparisons you can't make. So we'll be right back. Stick around.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are Raycon earbuds. Stay at home with better sound. More info at raycon.com/Tom. Omega XL, which according to clinical research helps joints. More info at omegaxl.com/Tom. CB Distillery, CBD for sleeping. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. The Clean Phone Pro, phone sanitizer and charger. More info at thenewdealshop.com. Keeps hair loss treatment. More info at keeps.com/Tom. And Plexiderm Wrinkle Reducer. Real science, real results. More info at plexiderm.com, code TOM.
We say fight back!
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is The Hidden History of Guns and the Second Amendment by yours truly. This is from Chapter 1, The Unholy Alliance of Racism, Genocide, and Guns. In Isaiah 14:21, the Lord tells Isaiah, "Prepare for his sons a place of slaughter because of the iniquity of their fathers." It's a variation on the old story of karma and seems in a very real way to be playing out today in the United States. America is facing an epidemic. Public health officials use that word of gun-related suicides, accidents, and even homicides and police killings. That epidemic has grown worse in the past decade, largely because the number of guns in America has increased, in large part because of the racial fears of white men who have bought guns in record numbers for 8 years during the time in office of America's first black president. A landmark 1999 study from researchers Franklin Zimmering and Gordon Hawkins showed that the main correlation, far surpassing mental illness, socioeconomic status, or race, that could be defined as causal in predicting the rates of gun deaths is a simple number: the number of guns distributed among society. In the 30 years since that study, Zimmering and Hawkins' results have been replicated and reanalyzed dozens of times. As the American Academy of Pediatrics said in a release published in AAAS's Science magazine, quote, "New research shows dramatic differences in the number of children hospitalized and killed each year in the U.S. from firearm-related injuries based on their state's gun legislation, even after adjusting for poverty, unemployment, and education rates. It found twice as many pediatric firearm deaths in states with the most lenient gun regulations compared to states where gun laws are strictest," end quote. They added that this is a critical issue for children, quoting Stephanie Cho, MD, the lead author of the abstract, quote, "Firearm-related injuries are the second leading cause of death among children in the United States. But we found a clear discrepancy in where those deaths happen that corresponds with the strengths of states' firearm legislation. In states with lenient laws, children die at alarmingly greater rates," end quote. And unsurprisingly, America not only has unusually lenient gun laws, but also has more guns in civilian hands than any other country in the world. America has a bit more than 4% of the world's population, but holds almost 50% of all the guns in civilian hands worldwide, more than 390 million guns. And the more guns a society has, the more gun deaths it will experience. The NRA and their army of lobbyists have been quite successful in making this happen. During Obama's presidency, there was a steady and hysterical drumbeat of articles, emails, and political proclamations by so-called pro-gun politicians and think tanks, suggesting that Obama was preparing to take away everyone's guns at any minute. There was even a subtext embraced by the hard right that he wasn't going to stop there. After disarming white Americans, these folks said, Obama was going to intern them in otherwise unused FEMA camps. Flipped-out gun owners were repeatedly arrested during the Obama years trying to break into retired or temporarily vacant military facilities and toxic waste sites, looking for evidence to prove that Obama was, in fact, preparing the modern-day version of the World War II-era Japanese internment camps. White supremacy was the founding notion of this nation. White Europeans thought themselves so superior to the human beings they met here in 1492 that Columbus himself became the first North American slaver, shipping Taino Indians back to Spain as slaves to the royal family. A slave is as good as gold, Columbus wrote for the king and queen. Europeans in the Americas then stepped up that game into a hemisphere-wide campaign of racial genocide, pulling off the largest multi-generational mass murder in the history of the world. In the midst of that effort, they also created the legal mechanisms necessary to define and legally regulate slavery, and even built those systems into America's founding document, the Constitution. America was birthed in slavery and genocide, and both needed guns. It was the superior weaponry of guns that gave the European settlers a massive advantage over the bow and arrow-equipped Native Americans, and it was the raw power of widespread white ownership of guns in the South that propped up the institution of slavery for hundreds of years. Without guns, neither would have been possible, or at least neither would have been as easy as they were to pull off. And now, after centuries of guns being used to kill off and keep down people of color in America, those same guns are creating a terrifying epidemic of gun-facilitated violence, from public schools to private homes and public concerts. It's enough to make one think that Isaiah was onto something. Chapter 2, The Sanitized History of America. The United States' expansion and conquest in the late 18th century through the 19th century and into the 20th century is a history written by white men, inked in the blood of Native Americans, and built on the broken and bloody backs of enslaved people brought here from Africa. From 1791, when the Bill of Rights went into effect, until the end of the Civil War, the Second Amendment protected the rights only of white men to own guns. This is simply because until the ratification of the 14th Amendment, states determined who was recognized as a person protected under the Constitution. Initially, in most states, that meant that white men who owned land and paid taxes were the only people considered full citizens under the Constitution. In the South, white men with guns formed slave patrols to control slaves and formed posses to hunt escaped slaves. The book, The Hidden History of Guns and the Second Amendment. The case was about a law Congress passed giving workers the right to refuse dangerous tasks. Johnston.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
So there's this fascinating story over at The Nation right now, thenation.com, of course, that website, by Sonia Shah. It's titled, "It's Time to Tell a New Story About Coronavirus. Our Lives Depend on It." The subtitle, "The Way We Talk About Contagion Matters. It Shapes How Societies Respond and Whether Many of Us Will Survive." Sonia, welcome to the program. Great to have you with us.
Nice to be here.
I should add, you are a science journalist. You're the author of the book Pandemic, Tracking Contagion from Cholera to Ebola and Beyond. Your fifth book just out in June, The Next Great Migration, The Beauty and Terror of Life on the Move. And, of course, this piece here, your website, Sonia Shah, SoniaShah.com. Story has always fascinated me. I wrote a book, The Last Hours of Ancient Sunlight, basically about how our stories about civilization and our stories about how things are, our relationship to nature is like one of our most destructive set of stories. What is the story we're telling ourselves about coronavirus right now, and what are we getting wrong?
Well, I think since pretty much the advent of germ theory, we've basically thought of contagious diseases as the work of invasive germs that kind of encroach upon passive and unsuspecting populations. And so then if that's our story, that's sort of our paradigm and our narrative about how we understand infectious diseases, and that shapes our response, which is then to either try to repel those microbes from moving. If it's in people, we say close the borders, keep them out. We can scapegoat certain populations of being the ones who are carrying it, and we try to exclude them. And then the other part of it is we try to come up with killing chemicals to kind of surgically target and destroy these invasive, kind of foreign-seeming external germs. So it's kind of this paradigm of what I call microbial xenophobia. It's this idea that all these diseases caused by pathogens is like the whole issue is the pathogen itself that needs to be isolated and surgically targeted with usually with biomedical commodities. What we're missing in all of that is, well, there's certain inconvenient facts, of course, right? Like sometimes you have the pathogen around you and you don't actually get sick. Sometimes a person will get exposed to the pathogen and they will get very sick, and a person next to them will get exposed to the same level and won't get sick at all. So obviously the whole issue is a lot more complex than whether the pathogen is present or not. It has to do with our immunity, our exposure, how we're interacting with each other, all these broader things. And that's what gets obscured. So when we just focus on the pathogen and the invasiveness of it, what we miss is all the social and political environmental drivers, which ultimately might be more important in controlling the diseases once they emerge and also preventing them from erupting in the first place.
So you've got these two pieces, controlling them before they emerge and dealing with the eruptions. You point out in your article that so many of our diseases are actually zoonotic diseases. They're diseases that we got from animals. And certainly COVID-19 is one of those. Came out of bats via perhaps another species. MERS via camels, probably also originated with bats. SARS, civet cats, I think it was. So so I get that, okay, if we stop destroying natural habitats where there may be reservoirs of infections that have not previously infected the human race, we diminish the chance that we're going to come up against something like COVID-19, to which we have no natural immunity. But that kind of throws us back into germ theory, but in an environmental context anyway. Am I getting this, or is there a piece here I'm missing?
Yeah, I think that's right. But I think if you look at sort of the broader picture, what we see is since 1940, we've had hundreds of these pathogens either newly emerge or reemergence in new places where they've never been seen before. So this one is just the latest in a long line of pathogens that have been kind of traveling along this pathway. And about 60% of them come from the bodies of animals, like you said. 70% are from bodies of wild animals. And on a broad scale, what's happening is that people are invading wildlife habitat, and that destroys a lot of wildlife, of course. It's why we have this huge biodiversity crisis where we're losing 150 species every day. But the creatures that remain have to cram into smaller and smaller fragments of habitat that we leave behind for them, which means they're in more intimate contact with us. And like any living thing on the planet, when microbes find a new habitat to exploit, they do that, and they use that new area. And so that's what's happening is we are driving animals closer towards us, and that allows the microbes that live harmlessly inside of their bodies to start exploring ours. And in the beginning, that first confrontation is very violent. We don't have any immunity to these things, so that's why we're getting so many of us are getting sick from these novel pathogens. But the bigger picture is, that this is about our interactions with each other and with nature and the landscape.
So how do we begin changing our stories in our culture? I mean, they're endemic. They're embedded. They're in the Bible. I mean, they're in assumptions of governance. There are those, Dan Quinn and others who suggest that this all goes back to agriculture when we thought we could rise up and control nature, and that's why God condemned Cain and blessed Abel. But because Cain was the farmer, you're cursed. Is it that simple?
I think we've had different paradigms about how to understand contagious diseases. If you go back far enough, Hippocrates said it was all about miasmas and these smelly airs and gases and clouds that, if you breathe them in, that's what would make you sick. And that was our understanding of contagious diseases for thousands of years. When we were living through malaria and tuberculosis and cholera pandemics, that's how we thought that those things were making us sick. And we had a major shift with germ theory, which was in the 19th century. And I think we are coming to the point, and germ theory really was about, let's reduce this complicated, infectious disease process that involves like all of these different factors into just, a host, a germ, and an incursion, and that's it. And then we can just kind of surgically focus on this like microscopic kind of interaction. But what we're seeing with new diseases, hyper-reductionism, right? But what we're seeing with new diseases is, and that works fine. Like that worked well for diseases we had already basically controlled, right? We had already basically controlled malaria, TB, cholera. A lot of the diseases that were hugely burdensome on Western societies had mostly been controlled by then, thanks to social, because we had better housing, we had better infrastructure, we had better sanitation, hygiene, all of that. And that was done through a lot of hard work of activists, trying to change society, and they did. And so, germ theory works insofar as when we don't have a huge amount of disease around, we can use drugs, antibiotics, vaccines. All of those things really help control diseases that we already kind of knew about and had reduced transmission opportunities for them already. But now what we see with new diseases, when we have an Ebola outbreak, when we have a Zika out of nowhere, when we have new Lyme, new tick-borne diseases like Lyme and others, we can't produce antibiotics and medicines and vaccines fast enough to protect us from that first wave of disease when they first come into human populations, which, as we're seeing right now, is the most sort of destructive one.
Right. So we have 25 seconds left, Sonia. What's step one?
Well, I think we need to start telling a new story. I think we need to start understanding how our health is not just about the absence of a certain pathogen, but it's connected to the health of other populations, of our wildlife, of our ecosystems more generally. Brilliant.
Sonia Shah, her piece is the latest cover story in Nation magazine. It's time to tell a news story about coronavirus. Check out our books, Pandemic and The Next Great Migration. Sonia, thanks so much for dropping by.
Thank you.
We'll be back.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
15 minutes past the hour, more of the news of the day. Hey, find something new. Isn't this Ivanka thing cool? Let's talk about that too, right after this. And welcome back. Let's see here. Karen in Fredericksburg, Virginia. Hey, Karen, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. I wanted to say thank you for all that you do every day. And I wanted just to make a quick comment, and it's off the subject a little bit. Someone called in earlier and spoke about Noam Chomsky and how he's been, right. Excuse me.
And all these right-wingers going, oh, the Second Amendment, it's got nothing to do with slavery. Are you kidding me? What? This revisionist, these liberals. Yeah, right.
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is The Black Panthers, Portraits from an Unfinished Revolution, edited by Brian Shah and Yohuro Williams. This is from Chapter 1, In Defense of Self-Defense, Pathways to the Black Panther Party. People joined the Black Panther Party for many different reasons. The moment of politicization was different for everyone, but a few were commonly shared, including the 1963 bombing of the 16th Street Baptist Church in Birmingham, Alabama, and the 1965 Watts Urban Rebellion. A more general sense of frustration and alienation compelled others to join the Panthers' ranks. The party exerted an enormous pull on the imagination of the members, especially those who had experienced police brutality. In the rebellious spirit of the times, the party's bold stance on self-defense resonated with those seeking fresh alternatives for achieving social justice and black liberation. Party members expressed a deep appreciation for other aspects of the Panthers program, including its community service programs, which grew out of a genuine love for the people. My neighborhood friend, a sister that I've known since I was about 11 years old, said, Claudia, I want you to go with me. We're going to go and hear these Panthers speak at PS 92, which was an elementary school in our community. I said, okay, I'll go, I'm down. I listened to these brothers speak and I heard the pitch. I saw the determination and I saw the compassion. I thought, wow, this is the feeling that I used to get when I went into clubs and popped my fingers and got on the dance floor. It was the same feeling, except it was bigger for me now. It was bigger than me. It was full of love of the people. No longer did we have to argue and fight about, what are you looking at me like that for? Or don't step on my sneaker, or this is my block. Now we really had something to fight for. We had a people to fight for. This is bigger than any gang or club. We had a goal. We had something to look forward to, which was the betterment of black people. It was most definitely something that I was searching for, but I didn't yet know what that I was searching. I didn't find it. It fell on me. That was the first meeting. That's what actually started the wheels in my mind for me to become political. I was rank and file. I did a lot of things. The easiest way to say it is just to imagine worker bees. You got one queen, everyone else works. Rank and file. Those were the worker bees. We did it all. The one thing I enjoyed the most was teaching the political education classes on 7th Avenue in front of the Harlem office. That was the most fruitful. But anything I did, it was for the love of the people. Wherever I was sent, or whatever I had to do, it didn't matter anymore because it was for the love of the people. We were trying to get the word out. If I had to sell 125 papers in a day and I got close to that goal, then I did a good job. I was originally from Queens and came out of the Corona branch of the Black Panther Party. When the Panther 21 were arrested and went to jail, in order to keep those offices open and functioning, Panthers were sent all over the city to Harlem. I was one of the Panthers that ended up in the Harlem branch. That's how I got to be there on Wednesday nights to give the PE classes, the political education classes. I was extremely nervous the first time, but once I found my voice, then it went like clockwork. A lot of the people in the community who were just walking by were like, well, let me stop and see what this little girl is talking about, because I was indeed a little girl at that time. We started off every PE class with a 10-point program, and we ended every PE class with, okay, let me hear from you guys. What do you want to see different in your community, and how are you living? Then we would get the feedback, and then we would know how to concentrate our efforts. Rent strikes were crazy, because if you had to live like that, why should you pay rent? We did clothing drives, we did food drives, we did, of course, the breakfast program. There were a lot of other things that happened, and they might have been more meaningful, but those PE classes stayed with me. We were outside on the street in front of the office. When you were giving a class or you were having a talk inside the office and there were only Panthers around you, the feeling was just different than outside on the street. The Panthers knew what you were doing because they were Panthers and they were doing the same thing. Outside, there were constant questions and answers with the people. You had to give yourself up when you were outside in that crowd. You never knew who was going to say, we don't care about that, we don't care about you, you need to go away. There were a lot of people that just did not know where we were coming from and were afraid that if they were seen in the office or if they were seen asking questions, that they'd get reprisals, that they'd end up getting hurt. They were afraid. Things went so fast.
Time seems to accelerate when you're always looking over your shoulder. At this time, it was all-out war against the Panthers, and brothers are being shot down in the street or set up or going to jail for years. We have brothers in jail since that time, 40, 41 years. We've had brothers that we've lost on the inside that we can't let the world forget. The government said, okay, we're going to lock them up and throw away the key and no one will ever care. But it's not true. We want them out. We want freedom for all political prisoners. We don't want any more of them to die on the inside. That's the biggest injustice. There were times when our cadre consisted of almost nothing but women, and that was when the brothers were locked up or had to go underground. I remember being on a front line against a policeman on horseback and being 6 months pregnant. What we wanted was a simple street light, and we got the community out there and we blocked traffic. I didn't know whether I was going to be trampled, my baby killed, but I knew I had to be there. I was an active member of the party from 1968 to 1971, and in those few years, I aged 10, 15 years. We didn't have much time to be little girls. We went straight to womanhood. Depression. Talking about these things is bringing up all of these feelings, though I hadn't thought about or touched on them for a long time. It seems that as you get older and you look back on the things that you've done in your life, you say, oh my God, I could have gotten killed then. When you're young, fear is not really in your vocabulary, and once you look back, you wonder, why wasn't I afraid? We didn't have much time to be afraid. It was all about... On the science revolution this week, can Americans stop the Republican Party and their billionaire buddies before another 100,000 Americans die from COVID-19? Dr. Michael Mann is here, and I'm asking him about the new climate models that are projecting even more extreme warming. Are they correct? Remington Gregg, the Council for Public Citizen, joins me on how the coronavirus continues to spread, yet there are no enforceable health standards coming out of this administration. Also, Chloe Waterman with Friends of the Earth drops by on how we stop meatpacking plants from killing us. Find the Science Revolution wherever fine podcasts are available. In our special video for supporters of our program, people who sign up over at ThomHartmann.com, this week it's the story of what the rich libertarian billionaires who have been funding the Libertarian Party and the Republican Party for, well, in a big way since the election of Ronald Reagan for the last 40 years, and have succeeded by owning politicians and owning the Republican Party in preventing us from even getting a public option, much less a national health care system. What they are doing, what their answer is, what their response is to the question, what do we do when things really go bad? When the economy's falling apart, when epidemic disease is sweeping the country, what do we do? Well, it turns out they've got an answer. It's just not an answer for all the rest of us. They're getting in their private jets and heading off to their private little bunkers. Seriously, that's what they're up to. So I lay out the whole story, complete with details and names, over at ThomHartmann.com. Check it out. Thanks so much. And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And John in Minneapolis. Hey, John, what's up?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, in discussing slavery, I kind of changed my comment. We shouldn't forget that American Indians were enslaved. They were, really tortured and, they were wiped out in Hispaniola. They estimate over 2.5 million American Indians were enslaved in the Americas, and that's why the statue of Anate in Albuquerque was pulled down, because he was just absolutely brutal. He was brutal even for the time, which is in the 1600s. He was taken back to Mexico City and put on trial for his cruelty. He chopped the right foot off of 25 the Acoma Indians. He just, nearly, destroyed them also. And, I think we should, keep that in mind because often their story is not really told at all, and it sort of falls to the wayside. And also, I wanted to say we shouldn't be as xenophobic with, I think Taiwan is the country that had only 8 cases out of 25 million, and, New Zealand had 28 cases out of 5 million, and they had deaths rather. And then as far as cases, Taiwan only had about 450 cases, only because, science works if you follow it, and you follow the best science, which was what they did. So just those 2 points, just quickly.
Yeah. This from let's see who wrote this. Michelle Goldberg in the New York Times. If you're lucky enough to live in New Zealand, the coronavirus nightmare has been over since June. After more than 2 weeks with no new cases, the government lifted almost all restrictions. The borders are still shut, but inside the country, life returned to normal. It's coming back elsewhere, too. Taiwan, where most days this month, no new cases have been reported. Just held the Taipei Film Festival, and a recent baseball game drew 10,000 spectators. No coronavirus.
It's important to remember that Taiwan never had to shut down their economy because they went to these really extraordinary, things to do to keep the virus at bay. It was just amazing. And they only spend about $600 per person for their health care. So as a template for the world, we should all be following them in the next pandemic, if we survive this one, I think.
Yeah, I'm with you.
Yeah.
Thank you, John. And Rashid in Atlanta. Hey, Rashid, what's up?
Hey, Tom. I'm a longtime listener and was just hearing the engagement that you and Kenyatta is having regarding slavery. And I just wanted to contribute part to the conversation regarding the longstanding that the Catholic Church has or had up until 1741. There was a papal edict that was issued in 1452 by Pope Nicholas V that permitted perpetual servitude of slaves from the continent of Africa. It pretty much said that slaves from any other place were indentured servants, but you could perpetually enslave Africans. And that's kind of where we devolved into this whole situation with the proliferation of African slaves that were brought to the North American continent, primarily in the South American continent, and then the several million that were dropped off or enslaved, if you will, in the North American continent. And so I just wanted to contribute that, and I think that we need to, as a community, worldwide community, need to address where this perpetual nature of what the Catholic Church had issued as an edict for their entire community, and how it impacted what happened worldwide until slavery was pretty much, I guess, abolished to a certain extent, if that makes sense.
Right. Yeah, although there are still people held in slavery all over the world right now. But yes. Was that 1452 papal bull separate from the doctrine of discovery, or was it a subset of it or a piece of it?
I actually had to pull it up real quick before I called you just to make sure that I was correct. I thought it was 1652, but it actually was 1452, and it says Papal Bull 1452 Dum, and I don't know Latin, so it's DUMDIVERSAS, or Romanus Pontifex, Pontifex.
Right. That means it came from the Pope. Yeah. The rest of the Latin I don't know either. Rashid, thank you. I didn't know that. That's I learned so much from my callers. Thank you very much. It's great to hear from you, Rashid, and thank you for filling that in. Sean in Woodstock, Illinois. Hey, Sean, what's up?
Hi, Tom. Long-time listener, second-time caller. Last time was also an election year. Yeah, so we've had these pandemics before, and for some reason it seems to have skipped people's memories, but there was one in the 57, 58, and I found this in the Smithsonian magazine in June of this year. So it said a couple excerpts in April 1957, a new strain of lethal respiratory virus emerged in East Asia. Maurice Hilleman, an American microbiologist, then running influenza monitoring efforts at the Walter Reed Army Institute of Research, saw the problem coming and prepared the United States ahead of time. Quote, "This is a pandemic," unquote, he recalled saying. Quote, "It's here," unquote. And he moved quickly to alert the government, even predicting when the virus would hit U.S. shores the first week of September of 57. The U.S. Public Health Service ignored Hillman's warnings. Quote, "I was declared crazy," unquote, he said. He sent samples of the virus to the 6 biggest pharmaceutical companies, directing them to produce a vaccine for the flu. A pandemic of 1957-58 ultimately caused 1.1 million deaths worldwide. Some 20 million Americans were infected, and 116,000 died. Yet researchers estimate that 1 million more Americans would have died if not for the vaccine that he created and distributed 40 million doses, and his vaccine inoculated about 30 million people. So we've been in this rodeo before. Obviously, we're in a worse one, but the quick action that guy took crushed,
helped a lot of people. I was 6 years old that year. Of course, I don't have any memory of it, but amazing. Sean, thank you for that call and for that information. Gina in Berkeley. Hey, Gina, what's up?
Oh, hi, Tom. My question is going to be about the U.S. mail. I'm a senior. In fact, I'm older than you. And I'm not really into computers. I do everything through the U.S. mail, receive bills, pay bills, and vote by mail. So recently, Congress, both houses, voted to fund the mail, and Trump vetoed it. So I'm wondering, do you have any idea how we're going to fund the U.S. mail before the election?
Gina, it's going to be a real challenge. I mean, you've got Mitch McConnell saying that he's going to do everything he can to try to create chaos going up to the election. Donald Trump obviously doing the same thing. Yesterday at the Rose Garden, he was trying to say that there was some sort of difference between absentee ballots and mail-in ballots. And there is no difference. An absentee ballot is a mail-in ballot. And I think he knows that. He votes absentee. His family votes absentee. His campaign manager votes absentee. The people around him vote absentee. They all know what's going on. They all know what this is. But if they can screw with the mail enough that absentee ballots show up late and therefore don't get counted, and a large enough percentage of them don't get counted that it's a crisis that would cause, a couple of states like Florida and Texas to say, we can't quite certify this election here, then boom, it goes to the House of Representatives, and each state has one vote, and you've got 29 or 30 states that are Republican controlled, and bingo, Trump is president again. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
We'll be back with more of your calls in just a moment. It's the home of the political revolution, the Thom Hartmann Program. And welcome back. James in Spokane, Washington. Hey, James, what's up?
Hello there.
Hey.
Yeah, I'm here. Let me say first, BDS Israel. But you were speaking earlier to changing our story about the coronavirus and perhaps our backstory generally on a lot of things. Just want to point out how corrupted the Catholic Church over 1,500 years has been to free thinking and science, number one. And then number two, to control our story at all, we have to admit to what it is to a great extent. We're mostly, in this country at least, PTSD, neurotic. And, until we address that, I don't see how it's going to get better for anybody. Concern of the coronavirus or anything else is just continuing from generation to generation.
So what's your suggestion for fixing that, James?
Nothing directly, Tom, except we have to own the fact that we are as neurotic as we are. Stop thinking of anyone as being crazy. We're all fundamentally malformed psychologically and emotionally. We need to own that and address that. That's all. Yeah. I mean, alcoholism, for instance. My God, we're an alcoholic nation. We're led by alcoholic politicians who are mostly or, part-time, if not full-time alcoholics. And, I don't see it getting better until we own these things.
Yeah. Yeah, I can't disagree with that, James. And I would, although I would go a step further. I think that there are things that we can do about this. I think that, if you look at the evidence of other nations that have built political, economic, and social structures that work to lift up average people, working people, and protect poor people, you have a very different way of life and a very different psychology, and thus very different social outcomes from countries that practice radical laissez-faire capitalism like the United States and the United Kingdom. The US and the UK are the two most unequal developed countries in the world, and as a consequence have among the highest rates of a whole series of social ills that we now know from the research of Kate Pickett and Wilkerson, James Wilkerson, I'm pretty sure his name is, who wrote The Spirit Level and The Inner Level and Why Inequality Matters. There are three books. What they documented, and you can compare European country to European country, you can compare countries all around the world to each other, you can compare individual states in the United States, is that the more inequality there is, the more you have mental illness, the more you have unwanted pregnancies, the more you have sexually transmitted diseases, the more you have homicide and suicide, the more you have drug use and addiction, alcohol use and addiction would fall into that category. The more you have social disengagement from political systems, the less participation you have in civil society and governance. The higher rates, you have higher rates of theft and petty crime. You have higher rates of antisocial personality disorders. All of these things are not things that come because people are poor because somebody is rich. These are things that happen because there is a disparity in society between very rich people and very poor people. And we're not wired for that. We spent 3 million years living as tribes that took care of each other. We are wired to be social, to be here for each other. And this just breaks all that apart. We'll be back. Hey, we're putting together a series of American history books. It started with the hidden history of guns and the Second Amendment. Then we had the hidden history of the Supreme Court, the betrayal of America. Then the hidden history of the Republican war on voting. Coming out soon is the hidden history of monopolies, how big business destroyed the American dream. And then next spring, it's going to be the hidden history of oligarchy and tyranny. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, and Tiffany in Charlotte, North Carolina. Hey, Tiffany, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. I want to revisit the discussion on children going back to school with this pandemic. One of the things that people aren't bringing up is that a lot of children have single parents and they're raised by grandparents. And what happens to these children if these single parents or grandparents are hospitalized or even worse? They die. We'll have a whole host of orphans, and nobody seems to care about that. The other thing that concerns me is that they're going back during the advent of the cold and flu season. And we know that cold and flu, there's research that shows that cold and flu can coexist with the coronavirus. So we have no idea.
And increase the spread of it, because when you've got a cold or the flu, you're coughing and blowing particles all over the place, even if you don't have the COVID symptoms. If you've got the bug in your body, there you go. And your point, Tiffany, about the grandparents is a huge one, particularly in minority communities in the United States and among poor people in the United States, where mom and dad are not available, they're absent, they're dead, they're whatever it may be, or they've had to go someplace in search of work. Grandparents are particularly vulnerable in this situation.
Yes, and these children also don't necessarily, some of them are poor, they don't have access to washing machines.
Yeah. It's, It's almost as if Stephen Miller was sitting around and saying, how can we kill off more of the poor people in this country? How can we kill off more of the black and Hispanic people in this country? Well, gee, let's just throw all these kids into school and make sure that this really floods, the families of America. I know I'm a broken record here, but it all goes back to April 6th. All of a sudden, this administration and the Republican Party did a 180-degree screeching halt and reverse direction. Up until April 6th, we've got a problem, we've got a virus, we've got to lock down, we've got to do what China and Japan and Taiwan and all these other countries are doing, New Zealand, Australia, we've got to do that. And we were in the process of doing that. And then on April 6th, the New York Times, the Washington Post, CNN, MSNBC, and Fox all announced on the same day. The new research showed that the majority of the people who were getting sick and the majority of people, more consequentially, the majority of people who were dying from COVID-19 were people who were black or Hispanic. And all of a sudden, the Republican Party, Freedom Works, the right-wing billionaires, official mouthpiece, is like, oh, we got to get back to work. We've got to throw people back into this milieu. And now it's, we got to go back to school. And I realize it sounds like a crazed conspiracy theory. And maybe it is, but it seems to me like Stephen Miller is trying to practice eugenics here.
Exactly, because middle-class students most likely will get homeschooled or do virtual school, and poor students won't have that option.
That's right. That's right. And hey, it's fewer people on food stamps. I can just hear Stephen Miller saying it, fewer people on food stamps, fewer of these old people living on Medicare. We'll solve the Social Security problem. We'll just kill off a bunch of them. I mean, it makes my head explode on various days of the week. Tiffany, thank you for the call, and thanks for your comments. This is grim times. Mary in Waterloo, Iowa. Hey, Mary, what's up?
Well, I'm going to have to disagree about, yes, schools need to be opened, not in the high COVID areas, but children here in our area, a few got from daycare. So COVID is around, but I see parents coming into Walmart with their children without masks. About 75% don't wear masks, but the schools need to be reopened because about 10% will homeschool. I have grandchildren and great-grandchildren, and I know one child must be in school to learn because they just do not want to. And the parents, they're working, and they cannot have the exact time to teach. And we are not running any research. Where are these children or where are these parents picking up this COVID, like in the daycare center? But if we have 10% less kids in school, and we do like the CDC says, yes, we can have school open, and yes, that daycare center closed down for 2 weeks, and we may be doing this with schools if a child gets sick. But
Mary, my take on this, for what it's worth, is if you go back to the late 60s and early 70s, after Summerhill was published, E.S. Neal's book about a school that was run by the students, and there was this whole movement to get kids out of school, the deschooling movement. And in fact, one of our kids did this and demanded that we homeschool her, which we did ultimately. But there were some studies that were done as a result of that in the 70s and 80s, where they asked the question, what happens if a kid doesn't go to school for a year or even 2 years? What happens to those kids who take a year off? Originally, they were looking at gap years between high school and college, but then they started looking at what happens if they just miss the entire ninth grade, or what happens if seventh grade, just gets paused for a year. And by and large, what they found, and there's a fairly good body of literature on this from that era, was that it didn't make any difference. Kids caught up. If there's even a small chance that having our schools open is going to lead to the death of a lot more Americans, including our children, because a very small percentage, but nonetheless a measurable percentage of children will get this and die, then I don't think it's worth, I just don't think that the damage that will be done to children by missing a year of school, we've missed the spring, missed the fall, just take a year and put everything on hold and say, we're just not going to do school for a year. And we'll figure it out after that. I just don't think that that's going to do the kind of damage that people think it is. Yes, it'll be inconvenient for parents who are using school as daycare, and it'll be a problem for kids who are using school for nutrition. And we have to figure out a way around that. And a lot of communities have already done that. But school is not, it's not like breathing or drinking water. It's not an essential thing. Anyhow, we'll continue the conversation tomorrow. Same time, same place, and get out there, get active, tag You're It. Have a
You've
great
been
day.
listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are Raycon Earbuds. Stay at home with better sound. More info at raycon.com/Tom. Omega XL, which according to clinical research helps joints. More info at omegaxl.com/Tom. CB Distillery, CBD for sleeping. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. The Clean Phone Pro, phone sanitizer and charger. More info at thenewdealshop.com. Keeps hair loss treatment. More info at keeps.com/Tom. And Plexiderm wrinkle reducer. Real science, real results. More info at plexiderm.com, code TOM.
We say fight back!